Introduction to Price Discrimination. An overview. Good evening. Settle in. Let's begin our gentle exploration of a fascinating economic concept: price discrimination. If our prior discussion centered on perfectly competitive markets, imagine, if you will, a slight deviation, a subtle shift in the equilibrium, granting firms a touch more influence. Tonight, we consider situations where sellers, rather than being mere price takers, possess the power to influence the price they charge. This power, carefully wielded, can manifest as price discrimination. Now, what precisely is price discrimination? In its essence, it's the practice of selling the same goods or services to different customers at different prices, where these price differences are not simply based on cost differences. A subtle distinction, but crucial. A higher price on a product simply because shipping costs further is not price discrimination, but a higher price without a change in production or distribution costs. That's where we begin our journey. Think of a flowing river. In a perfectly competitive market, the water, supply and demand, moves freely, finding its own level, its own single price. But imagine building a series of carefully placed dams. These dams, in our analogy, represent the strategies a firm uses to segment its market and charge different prices. The water still flows, but it's level, and thus its value to those downstream is now control. This control, this ability to segment, allows the firm to extract greater value from the market. Economists have categorized these dams, these mechanisms of price discrimination, into three primary degrees: first degree, second degree, and third degree. Let's consider them in turn, allowing the nuances of each to gently unfold. First degree price discrimination, sometimes referred to as perfect price discrimination, is the theoretical ideal. Imagine a world where a seller knows exactly how much each individual customer is willing to pay for a product or service. They can then charge each person the maximum price they are willing to bear, their reservation price. In our river analogy, it's like knowing precisely how much water each farmer needs and charging them accordingly, maximizing the overall usage and revenue. This, as you might suspect, is rarely achieved in its purest form. The information required is simply too vast, too fluid. Think of haggling at a flea market. There is some attempt to assess your willingness to pay, but it is based on intuition and limited information. The classical economist might propose that a skilled negotiator, through careful questioning and observation, might approximate this ideal. However, in most modern markets, such personalized pricing is impractical, bordering on the impossible. Second-degree price discrimination, in contrast, involves offering different prices based on quantity consumed. This is more readily observable in our everyday lives. Think of bulk discounts, where the price per unit decreases as you buy more. Or consider tiered pricing for electricity, where the initial units are charged at a higher rate, followed by lower rates for subsequent usage. The policymaker might be concerned with the equity of these schemes, ensuring access even at low levels of consumption. Here, the seller doesn't necessarily know each individual's reservation price, but they design pricing structures that allow customers to self-select. They present different bundles or options, and customers choose the one that best suits their needs and willingness to pay. This relies on the consumer's rationality and their desire to maximize their own benefit. This is like offering different size containers of water at varying prices per unit, allowing each farmer to choose the amount that best suits their need. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination. This involves dividing the market into distinct groups and charging different prices to each group. This is commonly seen with student discounts, senior citizen rates, or geographic pricing. The key here is that the seller must be able to identify and separate these groups, preventing arbitrage, the practice of buying at a low price in one market and selling at a higher price in another. Imagine a movie theater charging different prices to students and adults. This works because students are easily identifiable, and it's difficult for them to resell their tickets to adults. The seller understands that students, on average, have a lower willingness to pay than adults, so they offer a lower price to attract them without sacrificing revenue from the adult segment. The ability to segment like this is crucial. If students can easily buy tickets for their adult friends, the entire system collapses. So, we've touched on the essence of price discrimination and outlined its three primary forms. We've observed how each works in theory and, to varying degrees, in practice. As we conclude this introduction, consider the ethical dimensions of this practice. When, if ever, is price discrimination fair? When does it become exploitative? And, importantly, how do these pricing strategies affect overall market efficiency and consumer welfare? Our next step is to delve more deeply into the mechanisms by which these forms of price discrimination are executed and sustained. How do firms identify and segment their markets? What are the legal and regulatory constraints? And, perhaps most intriguingly, how does the rise of digital marketplaces and personalized data impact the future of price discrimination? Let these questions guide you as you rest. Good night. Chapter 2. The core concepts: value, willingness to pay, and consumer surplus. Last time, we gently introduced the idea of market equilibrium and the dance between supply and demand. Now, let us delve deeper into the heart of individual valuation. For the efficient allocation of resources, it's crucial to understand what gives a good or service its perceived worth, and how that worth translates into tangible economic behavior. Today, we focus on value, willingness to pay, and the surprisingly crucial concept of consumer surplus, concepts that form the foundation for our next consideration: the subtle art of price discrimination. Imagine a cool glass of water on a sweltering summer day. Its value isn't simply its cost. It's the subjective satisfaction you derive from quenching your thirst. Economists attempt to quantify this inherent value through the concept of willingness to pay. It represents the maximum amount an individual is willing to part with to acquire that specific good or service. This isn't necessarily what they actually pay, but rather the upper limit of their perceived worth. Think of it as a personal auction, silently taking place in each consumer's mind. The price on the shelf is the starting bid, and your willingness to pay is your reserve price, the point beyond which you simply walk away. This reserve price is determined by a complex interplay of factors: your preferences, your income, the availability of substitutes, and even the immediate context. The sweltering heat, for example, significantly increases the willingness to pay for that water. Now, consider the scenario where you do purchase the water. The difference between your willingness to pay and the actual price you paid is what economists call consumer surplus. It's the quiet, often unacknowledged, benefit you receive from the transaction. You were prepared to pay more, but you didn't have to. This surplus represents a gain in well-being, a silent affirmation that the exchange was beneficial to you. These concepts, value, willingness to pay, and consumer surplus, are essential for understanding how markets function and how resources are allocated. They also unlock the door to understanding more complex market behaviors, such as price discrimination. And now, we can bridge these core concepts to the topic of price discrimination. With the fundamentals of willingness to pay and value understood, consider what happens when a seller, a savvy operator, recognizes these individualized values. Imagine a world where prices aren't uniform, but tailored to each customer's perceived willingness to pay. This is the realm of price discrimination. There are, broadly, 3 degrees of price discrimination. First, there's first-degree price discrimination, also known as perfect price discrimination. This is the theoretical extreme where the seller knows each customer's exact willingness to pay and charges them precisely that amount. The seller extracts the entire consumer surplus, leaving the buyer with no gain beyond the inherent satisfaction of the purchase. Think of a mythical car dealer who somehow perfectly knows your financial situation and attachment to a specific car model and charges you accordingly. Then, we have second-degree price discrimination. This is a more practical approach, where the seller offers different pricing tiers based on quantity consumed. Bulk discounts are a classic example. The idea is that some consumers are willing to pay a higher price for smaller quantities, while others are only interested if they can buy in bulk at a lower per-unit price. It's about capturing different segments of the demand curve by offering choices, rather than knowing each individual's maximum. Finally, there's third-degree price discrimination. This is, perhaps the most common form, where the seller divides the market into distinct groups and charges different prices to each group. Student discounts, senior citizen discounts, or geographic pricing are all examples. The key is that the groups must have different demand elasticities, meaning they respond differently to price changes. A movie theater, for example, might offer cheaper matinee tickets because those attending daytime showings are more price-sensitive than those attending evening shows. Understanding these mechanisms of price discrimination is crucial for both the classical economist, seeking to model market behavior, and the policymaker, striving to ensure fairness and efficiency. Each degree represents a different level of market power and a different distribution of consumer surplus. However, one might begin to wonder, if price discrimination is so effective, why isn't it more ubiquitous? What are the practical constraints, the ethical considerations, and the potential backlash that businesses must navigate? This, my friends, leads us to the complex landscape of antitrust law and the limitations of market power, a subject for our next contemplative session. Chapter 3. Perfect Competition versus Monopoly. Setting the stage last time, we explored the theoretical landscape of perfect competition, a state of idyllic balance where countless firms, each a tiny droplet in a vast ocean, operate without the power to influence the market's currents. Now, let's shift our gaze to a contrasting landscape, the realm of monopoly, a single imposing peak standing alone against the horizon. This transition is not merely about acknowledging different market structures, but about understanding how the absence of competition fundamentally reshapes the flow of resources and the determination of price. Within the tidy models of economics, there exists a fascinating deviation from the standard pricing model, one often seen in monopolistic environments: price discrimination. It's an art, really, of charging different prices to different consumers for the same good or service. But not because of cost differences, mind you. The core principle hinges on exploiting the varying degrees of willingness to pay that reside within the population of potential customers. Let's begin by understanding the most exquisite, though often unattainable, form: first-degree price discrimination, sometimes romantically termed perfect price discrimination. Imagine a world where a seller possesses the almost mystical ability to know precisely what each individual buyer is willing to pay. They extract the absolute maximum from each transaction, leaving no consumer surplus behind. Think of an art dealer, intimately aware of each collector's passion and financial means, extracting the very peak of their willingness to invest in a particular masterpiece. In this scenario, the monopolist acts like a highly efficient siphon, channeling all potential value into their own coffers. While theoretically fascinating, its practical implementation is rare, requiring an unparalleled degree of information and control. Next, we descend to a more grounded plane: second-degree price discrimination. Here, the monopolist doesn't know each individual's willingness to pay, but they do understand that consumers come in different types. Instead of tailoring prices to individuals, they create tiers or bundles designed to self-select different consumer groups. Think of electricity providers offering tiered pricing, charging lower rates for initial blocks of consumption and higher rates for subsequent usage. Or consider airline pricing, where last-minute bookings, reflecting urgent needs, often command a premium. The essence lies in offering choices that implicitly reveal a consumer's price sensitivity. This approach is akin to carefully constructing a series of waterfalls, each level designed to capture a specific portion of the potential customer base. Finally, we arrive at the most common and readily observable form: third-degree price discrimination. This involves dividing the market into distinct groups based on readily identifiable characteristics and charging different prices to each group. A prime example is student discounts at museums or movie theaters. The policymaker, observing these practices, sees an opportunity to serve a larger demographic by incentivizing attendance for segments who may not otherwise participate. Another classic illustration is geographical price discrimination, where a company might charge different prices in different countries based on local market conditions and regulations. The classical economist recognizes that this form of discrimination relies on preventing arbitrage, the practice of buying at a lower price in one market and reselling at a higher price in another. The monopolist, therefore, must be able to maintain separate and impermeable market segments. Each form of price discrimination rests upon certain conditions: the ability to differentiate customers, the power to set prices, and the capacity to prevent resale, thus preserving market segmentation. Consider the ramifications. In perfect competition, the invisible hand guides resources to their most efficient allocation. But in the realm of price-discriminating monopolies, this hand is subtly, yet decisively, reshaped. Consumer surplus is redistributed, production levels may shift, and the very definition of fair pricing becomes clouded in ambiguity. Is it inherently unjust to charge different prices for the same product? Or can price discrimination, in certain circumstances, lead to a more efficient allocation of resources, extending access to goods and services for segments that would otherwise be excluded? These questions linger, like the faint echo of a debate still unfolding. As we move forward, we'll consider how policymakers grapple with these complex issues, balancing the potential benefits of innovation and economic growth with the imperative of fairness and consumer protection. But for now, let us pause here, contemplating the delicate dance between market power and the nuances of value. What unseen forces, perhaps beyond the purely economic, influence the ethical considerations that shadow these practices? Chapter 4. Understanding elasticity of demand. A key factor as we've considered the fundamental dance of supply and demand, it becomes clear that simply charting the curves is not enough. We must delve into the heart of how sensitive consumers are to price changes. This, my friends, is the realm of elasticity, a concept that unlocks a profound understanding of market behavior, especially in the nuanced area of price discrimination. Tonight, we'll gently navigate the three primary degrees of this fascinating economic phenomenon. Consider it a river. Demand, in its basic form, flows steadily, but elasticity reveals the riverbed's composition. Is it smooth stone, allowing the water to slip by with little resistance? Or is it rough and porous, absorbing much of the flow with the slightest obstacle? In economic terms, are consumers highly responsive to price changes, or are they relatively indifferent? This sensitivity is the key that unlocks the door to successful price discrimination. First-degree price discrimination. The art of extraction. Imagine a bespoke tailor crafting a suit for a single client. The tailor, possessing intimate knowledge of the client's preferences and budget, can theoretically charge the absolute maximum the client is willing to pay. This, in essence, is first-degree price discrimination, sometimes referred to as perfect price discrimination. Here, the seller extracts every ounce of consumer surplus. The consumer surplus, remember, is the difference between what a consumer would have been willing to pay and what they actually paid. Under first-degree price discrimination, this surplus vanishes, flowing entirely to the seller. Think of a skilled negotiator, able to discern the other party's bottom line and secure a price just above it. In practice, achieving perfect first-degree price discrimination is exceedingly rare. It requires near-perfect information about each individual consumer's willingness to pay, a level of insight seldom attainable. However, certain situations, such as auctions or personalized pricing algorithms on online marketplaces, strive to approach this ideal. The classical economist might see this as an efficient, albeit somewhat aggressive, allocation of resources. Second-degree price discrimination. Volume and value. Now, let's shift our focus. Instead of individual tailoring, imagine a bulk discount offered by a wholesaler. This is second-degree price discrimination, where prices vary depending on the quantity consumed. Consumers self-select into different price tiers based on their consumption patterns. Think of tiered mobile data plans or bulk discounts on software licenses. Those who consume more pay a lower price per unit, while those with lighter usage pay a higher price per unit. This strategy leverages the fact that some consumers value the product more when consuming larger quantities, while others find diminishing return. The policymaker might scrutinize these schemes to ensure fair access, especially when essential services are involved. Second-degree price discrimination is a common and often accepted practice. It allows sellers to capture a larger share of the market by catering to different consumer segments with varying needs and consumption levels. The crucial element is that the consumers themselves choose which tier to occupy. Third-degree price discrimination. Segmentation and strategy. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, the most prevalent form in our everyday life. This involves dividing consumers into distinct groups and charging different prices to each group. The key here is that the groups must have demonstrably different price elasticities of demand. Consider student discounts, senior citizen discounts, or geographically segmented pricing. Students, for example, often have a more elastic demand for certain goods and services due to their limited budgets. By offering them a lower price, businesses can attract this price-sensitive segment without cannibalizing sales from less price-sensitive customers. Movie theaters charging different prices for matinee and evening shows are another example. The elasticity of demand is generally lower in the evenings, when people are off work and more inclined to splurge on entertainment. To successfully implement third-degree price discrimination, the seller must be able to identify and separate the different groups and prevent resale between them. Imagine airlines charging different prices for business and economy class tickets, preventing someone from buying an economy ticket and then demanding the perks of business class is crucial. So, we've journeyed through the landscape of price discrimination, from the individual precision of first degree to the tiered structures of second degree, and finally, to the segmented strategies of third degree. Each approach leverages the fundamental principle of elasticity, the varying sensitivity of consumers to price changes. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial for businesses seeking to optimize their pricing strategies and for policymakers striving to ensure fair market practices. But as we consider these divisions and their inherent complexities, we must also ask, what lies beyond price? What other strategies do businesses employ to capture value and navigate the ever-shifting currents of the market? Our economic journey continues. Chapter 5. The Fundamentals of First-Degree Price Discrimination. Introduction. Having explored the broader landscape of price discrimination, let us now gently descend into the fascinating intricacies of its various forms. Tonight, we begin with the most ambitious, shall we say, type. First-degree price discrimination. Imagine it as the purest expression of a seller's pricing power, a kind of economic ballot. Parafor. In this idealized scenario, the seller charges each customer the absolute maximum they are willing to pay for each unit of the good or service. Think of it as perfectly calibrating the price gun to the individual, a bespoke pricing approach for every transaction. No consumer surplus remains. It all flows into the coffers of the producer. The mechanics. The operation of first-degree price discrimination hinges on an almost impossibly comprehensive understanding of each customer's demand curve. The classical economist, observing this from afar, might suggest the following mental exercise. Imagine a consumer's willingness to pay represented by a descending staircase. Each step represents a unit of the good, and its height represents the maximum price the consumer will pay for it. Under normal circumstances, the consumer would purchase up to the point where the market price intersects with their demand curve, reaping a consumer surplus, the difference between what they were willing to pay and what they actually paid. In perfect price discrimination, however, the seller meticulously eliminates each of these steps of surplus. They charge the maximum for the first unit, the next highest price for the second, and so on. The staircase becomes a smooth slope, and the area under the curve, previously divided between consumer and producer surplus, is now entirely claimed by the producer. Examples and challenges. While the theoretical elegance of first-degree price discrimination is appealing, its practical application faces significant hurdles. Finding real-world examples is difficult, bordering on impossible in its purest form. The information requirements are simply too demanding. How can a seller truly know each consumer's absolute maximum willingness to pay for every single unit? Consider a car salesperson. They might skillfully negotiate and extract a higher price from one buyer than another, But even the most astute salesperson lacks perfect knowledge. Auctions, in certain contexts, can approximate first-degree price discrimination to some extent. Participants reveal their valuations through their bids, and the final price reflects the highest willingness to pay. Similarly, personalized pricing based on sophisticated data analysis may edge closer to the ideal, but never quite reach it. The policymaker, concerned with fairness, might point out that if perfectly implemented, this approach eliminates all consumer benefits from the transaction. Efficiency and equity. From an economic perspective, first-degree price discrimination can lead to an efficient allocation of resources. Since the seller captures all the surplus, they are incentivized to produce up to the point where marginal cost equals marginal benefit, even for consumers with relatively low willingness to pay. In a standard monopoly scenario, the monopolist restricts output to maintain higher prices. But with first-degree price discrimination, there is no such incentive to restrict production. Everyone who values the good above its marginal cost will ultimately consume it. However, this efficiency comes at a cost. The distribution of wealth becomes heavily skewed towards the seller, raising questions of equity and fairness. The consumer, feeling the pinch, may question the ethical implications. Limitations and considerations. Beyond the informational demands, first-degree price discrimination is vulnerable to arbitrage. If consumers who are charged lower prices can resell the good to those charged higher prices, the entire scheme collapses. Furthermore, such blatant price manipulation can generate significant consumer resentment and damage the seller's reputation. The illusion of fairness, even if not entirely accurate, often plays a crucial role in maintaining a stable market. Conclusion. So, we've considered first-degree price discrimination, a world of perfect information and perfectly tailored prices. While rarely seen in its pure form, understanding its theoretical underpinnings provides a valuable benchmark for analyzing other, more practical forms of price discrimination. Next, we shall delve into second-degree price discrimination, a strategy of offering different price schedules based on consumption patterns. What hidden choices, I wonder, will this approach reveal? Let us turn to that intriguing question in our next session and allow its subtleties to guide us towards sleep. Chapter 6. Historical Examples of First-Degree Price Discrimination. Doctors' Fees and Auctions. Good evening. As we've gently navigated the landscape of price discrimination, distinguishing its subtle varieties, we arrive tonight at the purest form, first-degree or perfect price discrimination. Recall that in this ideal scenario, the seller extracts the absolute maximum willingness to pay from each and every buyer. A theoretical summit, perhaps, but one with intriguing glimpses in the real world. The allure of first-degree price discrimination lies in its efficiency, at least from the perspective of total output. Unlike monopolies constrained by a single price point, a perfectly discriminating seller can serve everyone whose willingness to pay exceeds the marginal cost of production. This eliminates deadweight loss, the economic term for mutually beneficial transactions that don't occur under standard pricing. Now, let's consider a historical analog, the fees charged by physicians in times past. Imagine a small-town doctor, practicing before the advent of standardized insurance and transparent pricing. The classical economist, observing this scene, might note that the doctor, often embedded within the community, possessed intimate knowledge of each patient's circumstances. He knew their financial standing, their perceived value of health, and perhaps even their aversion to seeking alternative remedies. In essence, he held a uniquely detailed demand curve for each individual. The story goes that the doctor, motivated perhaps by a mixture of altruism and profit, adjusted his fees accordingly. The wealthy merchant, anxious to return to his ventures, might pay a premium. The struggling farmer, whose health was vital for the upcoming harvest, might receive treatment at a greatly reduced rate, or even for free. The process wasn't written down, of course, but it was as naturally organic as the seasons. The doctor, through this intricate dance of assessment and negotiation, aimed to capture the maximum possible surplus from each patient. It was a far cry from a perfectly transparent marketplace. While anecdotal evidence suggests that doctors of old engaged in some degree of price differentiation, it's unlikely it was ever truly perfect. Information asymmetry, the inherent imbalances of knowledge, always posed a challenge. Patients could conceal their true wealth, and the doctor's assessments were subjective, potentially influenced by personal biases or incomplete information. Still, it serves as a valuable example of a system that tilted towards first-degree price discrimination, a delicate balancing act between supply, demand, and social sensitivity. Turning our attention to auctions, we find another arena where elements of first-degree price discrimination flicker into view. Consider the classic English auction, where bidders progressively raise their offers until only one remains, claiming the prize. In theory, the winner pays slightly more than the second highest bidder's valuation, approximating their own willingness to pay. This, too, is a form of information extraction. The auctioneer, by facilitating the competitive bidding, compels participants to reveal their private valuations, extracting much of the available surplus. Now, modern auction theory explores a multitude of auction formats, each with its own nuances. Sealed bid auctions, for instance, introduce strategic complexities. The Vickrey auction, also known as the second price sealed bid auction, is particularly interesting. Bidders submit their bids in secret, and the highest bidder wins, but pays only the second highest bid. It is a fascinating system where it is typically in the best interest of the bidder to bid their true valuation. The policymaker finds this format compelling because it promotes honest bidding, enhancing economic efficiency. However, even in the most sophisticated auction setting, achieving perfect first-degree price discrimination remains elusive. Collusion amongst bidders, information asymmetries regarding the item's true value, and the inherent uncertainties of the future can all muddy the waters. The system may drift toward optimality, but perfect capture remains a theoretical limit. So, as we gently contemplate these historical examples, the nuanced practice of doctors' fees, and the controlled environment of auctions, we see that elements of first-degree price discrimination can emerge in different contexts. However, the inherent difficulties in acquiring perfect information and managing complex human interactions prevent it from fully manifesting in its idealized form. And now, as we bring this evening to a close, consider this. If first-degree price discrimination, with its focus on individual extraction, represents one extreme, what lies between it and the more common third degree, where we segment markets into broad groups? What are the intermediate strategies, the techniques used to nudge markets towards greater efficiency and profitability? This is a question that will guide our explorations next time, as we move deeper into the heart of second-degree price discrimination. Good night. Chapter 8. Modern attempts at first-degree price discrimination. Personalized pricing online. Ah, yes. We have explored the theoretical landscapes of price discrimination. From dividing markets to tailoring prices based on consumption, the concepts, I hope, have settled gently into your understanding. Now let's bring these ideas into the present, focusing specifically on the digital realm and the pursuit of what economists call first-degree price discrimination. The holy grail, if you will, of pricing strategies. First-degree price discrimination, as you recall, is the act of charging each individual customer the absolute maximum they are willing to pay for a good or service. Imagine a benevolent, yet profit-maximizing deity offering each person a bespoke price, perfectly calibrated to their desires and ability to pay. In theory, this eliminates all consumer surplus, converting it entirely into producer surplus. A beautiful, yet perhaps unsettling, equilibrium from the perspective of the consumer. Historically, such personalized pricing was largely confined to niche situations, bespoke tailoring, perhaps, or the haggling in a marketplace. The transaction costs, the sheer difficulty of gathering enough information about each individual customer, made it impractical on a large scale. But the digital age, with its oceans of data and sophisticated algorithms, has changed the landscape. Suddenly, the dream of perfectly personalized pricing, of extracting every last penny of consumer surplus, appears within reach. The online world offers a rich tapestry of data points. Browsing history, past purchases, location, device type, even the time of day, all are potential signals of a customer's willingness to pay. Algorithms, powered by machine learning, can analyze these data points to estimate an individual's reservation price, the maximum price they are willing to accept. Consider, for instance, the pricing of airline tickets or hotel rooms. The classical economist might assume a homogeneous product, a seat on a plane or a room in a hotel, priced uniformly. But in reality, prices fluctuate wildly, influenced by factors that reflect not just the cost of providing the service, but also the perceived willingness to pay of different customer segments. Those booking last-minute flights for business travel, for example, are often willing to pay a premium compared to those booking months in advance for leisure. Websites use dynamic pricing strategies, constantly adjusting prices based on demand and perceived customer profiles. Cookies track your browsing history, allowing websites to infer your level of interest in a particular product and adjust the price accordingly. This isn't necessarily full-blown first-degree price discrimination, but it represents a significant step in that direction. The challenges, of course, are considerable. Consumers are increasingly savvy about these tactics. They use VPNs to mask their location, clear their browsing history, and compare prices across multiple platforms. The policymaker grapples with the ethical implications of personalized pricing, concerned about fairness and potential discrimination. Is it equitable to charge different people different prices for the same product based solely on their perceived willingness to pay? Where does personalized pricing stray into price gouging or unfair market practice? Moreover, the algorithms themselves are not perfect. They rely on imperfect data and can make inaccurate predictions about a customer's reservation price. A botched attempt at personalized pricing can backfire, alienating customers and damaging a company's reputation. The pursuit of perfect price discrimination, it seems, is a delicate balancing act. A complex system where prediction jostles against privacy, and value must find equilibrium with fairness. So we find ourselves at an interesting juncture. The technological capacity for first-degree price discrimination exists, yet its widespread implementation is fraught with ethical and practical challenges. The digital market, a space of fluidity and vast interconnectedness, struggles to find stability between profit-seeking and consumer welfare. What principles will govern this new landscape, this era of personalized pricing? How will societies balance the efficiency gains of near-perfect price discrimination with the potential for exploitation and unfairness? That, my friends, is a question for another day, as we move into a realm where individual cost curves are but data points in a vast algorithm. And perhaps a question for our next exploration of price discrimination. Its second degree: data collection and customer profiling, the enabler of personalized pricing. Good evening, everyone. We've traced the theoretical contours of price discrimination, and now, let's delve into the practical mechanics that allow such strategies to flourish. Our focus tonight rests on the indispensable foundation of personalized pricing: data collection and customer profiling. Consider it the quiet engine room where insights are forged, transforming raw information into strategic pricing power. The ability to discriminate in price, to charge different customers different amounts for essentially the same good or service, hinges critically on understanding those very customers. This understanding is not gleaned through mere guesswork. It requires a systematic and often intricate process of data accumulation and analysis. It's akin to a sculptor patiently chipping away at a block of marble, revealing the form hidden within. That form, in our case, is the customer's willingness to pay. The mechanisms of price discrimination, as we know, are typically categorized into 3 degrees: first degree, second degree, and third degree. Each represents a different level of precision in extracting consumer surplus, the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what they actually pay. First-degree price discrimination, often termed perfect price discrimination, is the theoretical pinnacle. Imagine a vendor who knows precisely the maximum price each individual customer is willing to pay. This idealized scenario allows the vendor to extract every last penny of consumer surplus. In practice, of course, such perfect knowledge is virtually impossible. However, data collection and sophisticated algorithms are inching us closer, particularly in online environments. Think of dynamically priced airline tickets, where algorithms factor in everything from your browsing history to the time of day you're searching, attempting to gauge your urgency and thus your willingness to pay. Second-degree price discrimination involves offering different prices based on consumption levels. This is often seen in the form of quantity discounts or tiered pricing. The classical economist who first conceived of this would have recognized block pricing for electricity consumption. The first few kilowatt hours are priced higher than subsequent units. This system doesn't require knowing each individual's willingness to pay, but rather assumes that different usage levels reflect different underlying needs and, consequently, different price sensitivities. Data, in this context, is used to analyze aggregate consumption patterns and optimize the tiered pricing structure. Third-degree price discrimination, perhaps the most prevalent form, involves segmenting the market into groups with different price elasticities of demand. Student discounts, senior citizen rates, and geographic pricing are all examples. Identifying these segments and their corresponding price sensitivities requires careful data analysis. Market research, demographic data, and purchase history all contribute to building customer profiles that inform these segmentation strategies. The policymaker might consider this as a balance between fair access and economic efficiency. The crucial role of data collection in all three forms cannot be overstated. Consider loyalty programs, for example. These programs are not simply about rewarding customer loyalty. They are powerful data-gathering tools. By tracking customer purchases, preferences, and demographics, businesses can build detailed profiles that inform their pricing decisions. This data can be used to personalize offers, target specific segments with tailored promotions, and even predict future purchase behavior. The flow of information becomes a valuable asset in itself. Furthermore, the rise of e-commerce has dramatically increased the volume and granularity of data available to businesses. Online retailers can track every click, every search, and every purchase, creating a comprehensive picture of individual customer behavior. This wealth of data enables more sophisticated forms of price discrimination, blurring the lines between the different degrees. Personalized recommendations, targeted advertising, and dynamic pricing are all fueled by the relentless collection and analysis of data. However, this data-driven approach to pricing raises important ethical and social considerations. Concerns about privacy, fairness, and transparency are paramount. The ability to personalize prices also raises the specter of exploitation, particularly of vulnerable populations who may be less aware of pricing differences or less able to shop around. Navigating these ethical dilemmas requires careful consideration of the potential impacts of personalized pricing and a commitment to responsible data practices. It's a delicate balance, isn't it? As we move forward, it's worth pondering the next phase. As data becomes even more ubiquitous and algorithms even more sophisticated, what new forms of price discrimination might emerge? And what implications will these new strategies have for consumers and businesses alike? These are questions that will continue to shape the economic landscape in the years to come. Good night. The ethics of perfect price discrimination. Fairness and transparency. Last time, we considered the implications of market segmentation. Now let us turn our attention to a more idealized, and perhaps more ethically fraught, scenario. Perfect price discrimination. Picture, if you will, a world where each consumer pays exactly what they are willing to pay, no more, no less. This, in essence, is the promise, or the peril, of perfect, or first-degree, price discrimination. To understand its ethical dimensions, we must first revisit the mechanisms through which price discrimination manifests itself. We often speak of 3 degrees, each representing a progressively more granular approach to extracting consumer surplus. The first, as I've just outlined, is first degree, or perfect price discrimination. Imagine a skilled negotiator, able to ascertain the absolute maximum each individual is prepared to offer for a good or service. This individual, in theory, could extract every ounce of consumer surplus, leaving the consumer with zero benefit beyond simply obtaining the product. Think of an art dealer, intimately familiar with the tastes and financial resources of each patron, tailoring prices accordingly. It's a system of exquisite calibration, yet one that raises immediate questions of fairness. Then, we descend a step to second-degree price discrimination. This mechanism relies not on individual knowledge, but on offering different options designed to self-select consumers based on their willingness to pay. Quantity discounts are a classic example. Those willing to purchase in bulk likely place a lower value on each individual unit. Airlines offering different classes of service, economy, business, first class, similarly segment their customers based on perceived value and ability to pay. Here, the ethical waters begin to muddy. While no one is explicitly charged their maximum willingness to pay, the system is designed to extract more from those who can afford it, offering a lower price to those more sensitive to cost. Is this inherently unfair? The answer, as with so many economic questions, is rarely straightforward. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, the most common and perhaps the most readily accepted form. This involves dividing the market into distinct groups, each with different price elasticities of demand, and charging different prices accordingly. Student discounts, senior citizen fares, and geographical pricing differences all fall into this category. The underlying rationale is simple. Some groups are more price-sensitive than others. Charging them a lower price maximizes overall profit. From an ethical perspective, this approach often elicits less concern than its more granular counterparts. The lines are drawn based on readily identifiable characteristics, and the price differences are usually transparent. However, even in the case of third-degree price discrimination, questions of fairness linger. Is it ethical to charge a higher price to consumers in a region where competition is limited, or to exploit the relative vulnerability of a particular demographic group? The classical economist might argue that such practices are simply reflections of market forces, maximizing overall efficiency. The policymaker, however, must consider the broader societal implications, weighing the potential benefits of increased production and innovation against the potential for exploitation and inequity. Now, let us return to our initial focus: perfect price discrimination. If executed perfectly, such a system would maximize economic efficiency. Resources would be allocated optimally, with no potential gains from trade left unrealized. Yet, the ethical objections are profound. The entire consumer surplus is captured by the seller, leaving the consumer with no additional benefit beyond the satisfaction of acquiring the good or service. Transparency becomes paramount. If consumers are unaware that they are paying their maximum willingness to pay, or if they perceive the pricing process as opaque and manipulative, trust erodes. And when trust erodes, the entire market system weakens. Consider, for instance, dynamic pricing algorithms used by online retailers. These algorithms constantly adjust prices based on real-time data, including browsing history, location, and even the type of device used. While such systems can increase efficiency and offer personalized deals, they also raise concerns about transparency and fairness. Are consumers being treated equitably, or are they being subtly manipulated into paying more than they should? The answer lies, in part, in the degree to which these algorithms are transparent and accountable. Full disclosure, or at least a readily accessible explanation of how prices are determined, can mitigate the perception of unfairness. Ultimately, the ethics of perfect price discrimination hinges on a delicate balance, maximizing economic efficiency while maintaining fairness and transparency. It requires a careful consideration of the power dynamics between buyers and sellers, and a commitment to ensuring that consumers are not exploited in the pursuit of profit. The question is not simply whether price discrimination can be implemented, but whether it should be, and under what conditions. We've only scratched the surface, but what other less obvious costs arise from the pursuit of perfect price information? Perhaps the next stage is to look at the meta-economic landscape, the cost of information itself. Chapter 11. Signaling and Screening. Strategies to combat asymmetry. Yes. We've spent some time navigating the murky waters of information asymmetry. Last time, we discussed the initial problems this asymmetry creates, the anxieties of hidden knowledge that plague so many economic interactions. Unlike first degree, the seller doesn't know each individual's willingness to pay beforehand. Instead, they design pricing schemes that allow customers to self-select into different price tiers. Think of it as a subtle dance, a graceful negotiation between seller and buyer, each navigating the terrain of perceived value and strategic pricing. Paragraph 3. The most common manifestation of this strategy is the venerable volume discount. Consider, for instance, the bulk purchase of office supplies. The astute stationery supplier understands that businesses requiring larger quantities may have a lower per-unit valuation, or perhaps that the sheer scale of the order justifies a reduced price. Therefore, they offer tiered pricing: a low price for small orders, a slightly lower price per unit for medium orders, and the most enticing price for the largest volume. It's a balanced ecosystem, each level satisfying a different need and contributing to the overall flow of commerce. Paragraph 4. But why, you might ponder, does this qualify as price discrimination? The answer lies in the cost structure. If the cost of producing each additional unit remained constant, offering a volume discount would simply be leaving money on the table. Instead, volume discounts often reflect economies of scale, where the average cost of production decreases as output increases. By charging different prices based on quantity, the seller captures a larger portion of the consumer surplus, the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what they actually pay. The classical economists would argue that this redistribution enhances efficiency, allowing more goods to flow into the market and reaching a broader segment of the population. Paragraph 5. Now, let's consider a more complex, yet equally intriguing form of second-degree price discrimination. Bundling, at its core, is the practice of selling two or more products or services together as a package. Imagine the local cable company offering a bundle of internet, television, and phone service. Individually, these services might each have a distinct market price. However, by bundling them together, the company taps into a different aspect of consumer valuation. Paragraph 6. The beauty of bundling lies in its ability to exploit differences in consumer preferences. Some customers may value internet highly, but have little interest in cable television, while others might prioritize television and find internet less essential. By offering a bundle at a price attractive to both segments, the seller captures a wider range of consumers and extracts more overall value. It's a clever strategy, a delicate equilibrium where the sum of the parts exceeds the perceived value of the individual components for certain customers. Paragraph 7. Furthermore, bundling can also serve as a barrier to entry for competitors. A smaller firm offering only internet service, for example, may struggle to compete with the comprehensive offering of the larger bundled provider. The policymaker must carefully observe these dynamics, ensuring that bundling practices don't unduly stifle competition or harm consumer welfare. It's a balancing act, weighing the benefits of convenience and value for consumers against the potential for market dominance and reduced choice. Paragraph 8. Consider, too, the software industry, where suites of applications are commonly bundled together. A word processor, spreadsheet program, and presentation software, each valuable in their own right, are often offered as a single discounted package. This allows the company to capture a broader market share, catering to diverse needs with a single cohesive offering. Paragraph 9. Second-degree price discrimination, therefore, represents a fascinating intersection of strategy, economics, and consumer behavior. It's a complex dance, a delicate balance between maximizing profits and catering to the diverse needs of the market. Volume discounts and bundling represent powerful tools in the arsenal of the modern firm, offering pathways to both enhanced profitability and broader market reach. Paragraph 10. But even as we understand the intricacies of second-degree price discrimination, a subtle question lingers in the air. What happens when the observable characteristics used for these self-selection mechanisms become less reliable? When the very act of buying changes the market dynamics? We will gently explore this transition as we move towards the realm of third-degree price discrimination in the coming chapter. Title: Chapter 12. Menu Pricing. Designing options to capture different consumer valuations. Body. Welcome, students, to the quiet contemplation of pricing strategies. Last time, we discussed the foundational principles of cost structures and their impact on pricing decisions. Tonight, we'll venture into the nuanced world of menu pricing, a sophisticated dance between sellers seeking to maximize profits and buyers seeking the best possible value. More specifically, we'll be exploring the fascinating landscape of price discrimination, a term that, despite its negative connotations, often simply reflects the reality of differing consumer valuation. Think of a flowing river. The water, though uniform in its essence, carves different paths depending on the terrain. Similarly, a single product or service can be offered at various prices to capture the disparate willingness to pay across the market. This is the essence of price discrimination, and it manifests itself in distinct degrees. Let's begin with the ideal, yet rarely achievable, scenario. First-degree price discrimination, often referred to as perfect price discrimination. Imagine the classical economist, possessing perfect knowledge of each individual consumer's maximum willingness to pay. They would then charge each customer precisely that amount, extracting every last ounce of consumer surplus. Auction houses, with their dynamic bidding processes, offer a glimpse into this realm, though rarely achieving its perfect realization. The benefit, from the seller's perspective, is maximized profit. From society's perspective, the outcome can be efficient, as the good or service flows to those who value it most highly. However, equity becomes a serious question. Is such a system fair? Next, we descend to second-degree price discrimination, a more practical and frequently observed phenomenon. This involves offering different versions or quantities of a product at varying prices. Think of a tiered data plan from a telecommunications company. The consumer self-selects the option that best matches their usage and willingness to pay. Bulk discounts are another prime example. Individuals who purchase larger quantities often receive a lower price per unit, reflecting economies of scale for the seller and varying consumption needs for the buyer. This degree relies on the principle of revealed preference, letting the consumer's choices dictate the price they pay. Second-degree price discrimination doesn't require knowing each individual's exact willingness to pay, just offering a range of options that cater to the spectrum of valuations. The policymaker often sees this as a good middle ground, allowing producers to extract more value while still benefiting consumers who opt for the lower-priced options. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, the most common and readily identifiable form. This involves dividing the market into distinct segments and charging different prices to each segment. Student discounts, senior citizen rates, and geographically differentiated pricing all fall under this category. The key here is the ability to identify and separate these segments, preventing arbitrage, the practice of buying at the lower price and reselling at the higher price. Movie theaters, for example, charge lower prices for matinee showings, targeting a price-sensitive segment willing to attend at off-peak hours. Third-degree discrimination requires that the statistician know the elasticity of demand in each segment. If demand is more elastic in one segment than another, it makes sense to charge that segment a lower price. These 3 degrees of price discrimination represent a spectrum of strategies, each with its own challenges and opportunities. Understanding these mechanisms allows businesses to craft menu pricing strategies that effectively capture the varying valuations within their customer base. The artistry lies in designing options that are attractive to different consumer segments without cannibalizing sales from higher-paying customers or triggering ethical concerns. As we conclude, consider this. How does the rise of personalized pricing, driven by advanced data analytics, blur the lines between these 3 degrees? Is it heralding a new era of price discrimination, or simply refining existing techniques? This intriguing question will guide us into our next exploration: the ethical considerations inherent in pricing strategies and the role of regulation in shaping a fair marketplace. Transition. The next chapter will cover ethics and regulation in pricing, mood, analytical, soothing, and contemplative, suitable for late-night study. The prose is rhythmic and clear, designed to promote relaxation while engaging with the material. The tone is that of a thoughtful professor, gently guiding the student through complex concepts. Nomachan. 1 Menued. Chapter 13. Quantity discounts. Incentivizing bulk purchases. We've explored the landscape of perfect competition, its theoretical purity, and its practical limitations. Now, let's turn our attention to a more nuanced terrain: the strategies firms employ when they possess some degree of market power. One prominent strategy, a fascinating facet of price discrimination, is the offer of quantity discounts, the alluring proposition that buying more equates to paying less per unit. This seemingly simple tactic is deeply rooted in the principle of extracting consumer surplus. Remember, consumer surplus is that area of benefit residing beneath the demand curve, but above the price line. It represents the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what they actually pay. Firms, naturally, desire a larger slice of this surplus. And quantity discounts, in their various forms, provide a mechanism to achieve just that. Quantity discounts fall squarely within the realm of price discrimination, a practice where a seller charges different prices to different consumers for the same good or service, not justified by cost differences. Price discrimination isn't necessarily malevolent. It's often a shrewd business tactic that, paradoxically, can increase overall economic efficiency, provided certain conditions are met. It's about aligning prices more closely with individual willingness to pay. To better understand quantity discounts, let's place them within the broader framework of price discrimination, classified into 3 distinct degrees. Each degree represents a successively more refined attempt to capture consumer surplus. First-degree price discrimination, also known as perfect price discrimination, is a theoretical ideal. Imagine a scenario where a firm knows exactly how much each consumer is willing to pay and charges them precisely that amount. This would essentially eliminate consumer surplus entirely. Think of a skilled negotiator who can extract the maximum possible price from each individual client. While rare in its pure form, elements of first-degree discrimination can be found in bespoke services, auctions, or even haggling situations where personalized pricing prevails. Second-degree price discrimination is where quantity discounts truly shine. This approach involves charging different prices based on the quantity consumed. It acknowledges that consumers have varying levels of demand, and by offering tiered pricing, the firm can cater to these different segments. Examples abound: bulk discounts at supermarkets, tiered pricing for utilities like electricity and water, or membership levels with varying benefits and costs. The firm doesn't need to know each consumer's individual willingness to pay. Instead, it designs pricing structures that reveal those preferences through consumption choices. The allure of a lower per-unit price incentivizes higher consumption levels, allowing the firm to capture more surplus from those with a greater desire for the product. Third-degree price discrimination involves dividing the market into distinct groups and charging different prices to each group. These groups typically have different demand elasticities. Think of student discounts, senior citizen rates, or geographically differentiated pricing. The classical economist would observe that airlines charging different prices for the same seat to business travelers versus leisure travelers are engaging in this practice. The key is identifying and separating these groups effectively. The policymaker, however, is likely to consider the fairness and equity implications of charging different prices to different demographic groups. Returning to quantity discounts specifically, they are a potent tool for increasing sales volume, clearing inventory, and ultimately boosting profits. However, their effectiveness hinges on several factors: the elasticity of demand, the costs of production and distribution, and the potential for arbitrage. The careful design of discount structures is crucial. Too steep a discount can erode profit margins, while too small a discount may fail to incentivize the desired increase in consumption. In essence, quantity discounts are a sophisticated dance between price and volume, a balancing act between profitability and consumer attraction. They exemplify how firms can leverage their understanding of consumer behavior to strategically extract value from the marketplace. They operate on the principle that incentivizing bulk purchases can unlock greater overall gains, benefiting both the firm and, potentially, the consumer. But even as we appreciate the mechanics of price discrimination and the art of quantity discounts, one question lingers: how did these strategies evolve in the digital age, where information flows freely and consumer behavior is increasingly transparent? Our journey through the intricacies of market dynamics is far from over. It remains open to exploration and refinement. Bundling strategies. Pure versus mixed bundling. Tonight, our journey through the landscapes of price discrimination takes a turn towards the art of bundling. Recall our previous explorations of first, second, and third-degree price discrimination, each a method employed by the firm to extract greater surplus from a diverse customer base. We learned how the sculptor, with perfect knowledge, carves out individual prices, how the tiered merchant offers varied options for self-segmentation, and how the segmented vendor divides the market into identifiable groups. Now, let us consider how these principles interplay with the strategy of bundling, a seemingly simple yet profoundly impactful tactic. Bundling, in its essence, is the act of selling two or more distinct products or services as a single package. This can manifest in two primary forms: pure bundling and mixed bundling. Imagine a gentle stream branching into two distinct paths, each carving its own course through the economic terrain. Pure bundling, as the name suggests, is the more rigid of the two. Here, the firm offers the bundle exclusively. Individual components are unavailable for separate purchase. Think of a software suite, or perhaps a season ticket to a concert series. The benefit lies in the fact that customers are offered no other choice. They must purchase the entire package, or nothing at all. The effectiveness of pure bundling rests on the diversity of consumer valuations for the individual components. Suppose we have two types of customers: those who highly value product A but only moderately value product B, and those with the opposite preference. Selling the products separately might leave surplus on the table, failing to capture the willingness to pay from each customer for their less preferred item. By bundling, the firm essentially creates a new product with a price point that appeals to both groups, capturing a greater portion of their combined willingness to pay. Now let us consider the other path: mixed bundling. This strategy offers customers the option of purchasing the bundle at a discounted price or buying the individual components separately. It allows the firm to cater to a wider spectrum of consumer preferences. Picture a package holiday where you can either buy the flight and hotel together at a bundled rate or book each element individually. The magic of mixed bundling resides in its ability to target specific consumer segments. Customers who highly value both products will likely opt for the bundle, maximizing their savings. Those who only desire one product can still purchase it individually. Furthermore, mixed bundling can be strategically used to clear excess inventory of one product by tying it to a more popular item. It is a subtle dance, a balancing act between maximizing revenue and catering to individual needs. The analytical firm meticulously adjusts the bundle price and individual product prices to optimize profitability. Consider this through the lens of our earlier discussions of price discrimination. Bundling, in both its pure and mixed forms, often functions as a form of second-degree price discrimination. By offering different product configurations, the firm allows customers to self-select into different price tiers. The customer who places a high value on all components chooses the bundled option, effectively paying a higher overall price than the customer who only values a single item and purchases it individually. But the degree to which bundling embodies true price discrimination depends on context. If the cost of producing and distributing the bundle is significantly lower than the sum of the individual components, then the discounted bundle price may simply reflect cost savings, rather than a strategic attempt to extract additional surplus. The policymaker must carefully analyze the cost structures to discern whether bundling is truly exploitative or simply efficient. The choice between pure and mixed bundling depends on a multitude of factors: the correlation of consumer valuations, the cost structures of production, and the competitive landscape. A market with strong competition might favor mixed bundling to offer greater flexibility and attract a wider customer base. A market with limited competition might allow the firm to implement pure bundling and capture a larger share of consumer surplus. And so, as the moon hangs high and the hour grows late, we pause to consider the elegance of bundling. It is a powerful tool, a flexible strategy that allows the firm to navigate the complexities of consumer demand. But as we reach the end of our conversation on bundling, consider how these strategies will play out in the face of network effects and the increasing value that arises when services are linked together on a wider scale. Does that increase the power of the bundled offer, or will customers rebel against it? The answer, like the currents of a deep river, remains to be seen. Chapter 15. Two-part tariffs, membership fees, and usage charges. Welcome back, my friends. Last we spoke, we considered the nuances of bundling as a strategic pricing tool. A seemingly simple strategy, bundling, yet deeply impactful on consumer surplus and firm profits. Tonight, we turn our attention to another fascinating pricing strategy, one that might feel strangely familiar in your daily lives: the two-part tariff. Imagine, if you will, a quiet corner of the marketplace. Here, rather than a single price dictating access, a consumer faces two distinct charges: a membership fee, sometimes called an entry fee, and a usage charge. Think of your local golf club. An initial membership fee grants you access to the grounds, and then a per-round fee covers the cost of playing a game. Or consider a warehouse shopping club. You pay for a yearly membership, and then you pay for each item you purchase. This, in essence, is the two-part tariff. The brilliance, or perhaps the cunning, of the two-part tariff lies in its ability to extract more consumer surplus than a simple, uniform price. Let's gently untangle this. Remember, consumer surplus is the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay for a good or service and what they actually pay. Under a single price system, some consumers gain a significant surplus. They would have paid more, but the market price keeps them from doing so. A two-part tariff allows the seller to tap into this untapped willingness to pay. To understand how, we must remember the broader context of price discrimination. You see, the two-part tariff is closely related to mechanisms of price discrimination, in particular, second-degree price discrimination. Let us reflect on the different degrees of price discrimination. First-degree price discrimination is a world of perfect information for the seller. The seller knows exactly how much each customer is willing to pay and charges them that amount. This is an ideal, often theoretical, scenario. Third-degree price discrimination involves dividing consumers into groups and charging different prices to each group. The seller differentiates based on observable characteristics. Second-degree price discrimination, however, relies on quantity or consumption levels. This is where the two-part tariff nestles in. The seller offers a menu of options, and consumers self-select based on their preferences. The membership fee in a two-part tariff acts like a hurdle. Only those consumers who anticipate sufficient usage to justify the fee will opt in. The usage charge then recovers marginal cost, or a markup over marginal cost, depending on the specific strategy. Consider a homogeneous group of consumers, each with identical demand curves. Imagine the classical economist wants to maximize profit selling access to a park with a delightful Ferris wheel. If the classical economist sets the usage charge equal to the marginal cost of operating the Ferris wheel, each ride is efficiently priced. Now, the classical economist can charge a membership fee equal to the entire consumer surplus generated at that price and quantity. In this idealized scenario, the firm captures all the available surplus, turning consumer surplus into producer surplus. The reality, of course, is far more complex. Consumers are rarely homogeneous. If the policymaker wants to set a two-part tariff, but faces consumers with varying demands, it becomes a balancing act. A high membership fee will deter consumers with lower demand, reducing overall participation. A low membership fee might attract more members, but leave significant consumer surplus on the table. Finding the optimal balance between the membership fee and the usage charge becomes a delicate exercise in estimation and prediction. Further complicating matters, the usage charge itself can impact demand. If the usage charge is set too high, consumers might curtail their usage, even if they've already paid the membership fee. This interplay between the two charges creates a subtle feedback loop, demanding careful consideration. The two-part tariff, therefore, is a sophisticated tool. It allows a seller to extract more value than a simple pricing strategy. But it requires a deep understanding of consumer behavior and a careful calibration of the two charges. It's a dance between access and consumption, a delicate balance between attraction and extraction. As we conclude tonight's quiet contemplation, consider this. If two-part tariffs represent a strategic maneuvering within an existing market structure, what happens when the market structure itself begins to shift and morph? What happens when new competitors, new technologies, and new business models challenge the very foundations of our assumptions about pricing and market power? This, my friends, is the question that will gently guide us forward into the next phase of our economic journey. Sleep well. Chapter 16. Peak Load Pricing. Managing Demand Fluctuations. Ah, yes. We have meandered through the landscapes of cost functions and production possibilities, understanding the delicate dance between resources and output. Now, let us turn our attention to the challenge of demand, specifically its ebb and flow, its peaks and valleys. This brings us to the fascinating world of peak load pricing, a powerful tool built upon the foundations of price discrimination. Imagine a tranquil lake. During the day, sunlight bathes its surface, stimulating growth and activity. Many boats glide across the water. In the evening, as twilight descends, the lake calms, the boat traffic diminishes, and serenity returns. Similarly, the demand for many goods and services experiences diurnal, weekly, or even seasonal fluctuations. Electricity, for instance, sees its highest demand during daylight hours, particularly in summer when air conditioning units hum in chorus. Public transportation systems are burdened during rush hour, but stand comparatively empty in the early afternoon. How does a provider reconcile the necessity of meeting peak demand with the inefficiency of underutilized resources during off-peak periods? The answer, my friends, lies in peak load pricing. Peak load pricing essentially charges higher prices during periods of high demand and lower prices during periods of low demand. But isn't this just different prices? Yes, but the economic justification delves deeper than arbitrary markups. It's fundamentally about aligning price with the marginal cost of provision. During peak periods, the marginal cost of supplying an additional unit rises sharply. Existing capacity is strained, and the provider may need to activate more expensive resources, such as backup generators in the case of electricity. Conversely, during off-peak periods, the marginal cost is lower. Spare capacity exists, and cheaper resources can be utilized. Now, consider the connection to price discrimination. Price discrimination, in its essence, occurs when a seller charges different prices to different consumers for the same good or service, without justification based on cost differences. There are three principal categories. Let's examine them with the calming rhythm of a slow waltz. First-degree price discrimination. Imagine the classical economist, a benevolent and all-knowing planner. He knows exactly how much each consumer is willing to pay for each unit of a good or service. He can, therefore, extract the entire consumer surplus by charging each consumer their maximum willingness to pay. This is perfect price discrimination. Think of an idealized auction, where the auctioneer perfectly anticipates and extracts the value each bidder places on the item. It is rarely achieved in practice, as perfect knowledge of consumer valuations is almost impossible to attain. It exists more as a theoretical benchmark. The policymaker acknowledges it as a target, but unattainable in its purest form. Second-degree price discrimination. Now, the policymaker relinquishes the perfect knowledge. Instead, he knows that consumers have different preferences, but he cannot directly identify them. He can, however, design pricing schemes that induce consumers to self-select. This is second-degree price discrimination, often seen in the form of quantity discounts or tiered pricing. Think of bulk discounts at a warehouse store. Those with high demand are more likely to purchase in bulk, revealing their higher valuation, and thus pay a lower per-unit price. Peak load pricing can be considered a form of second-degree price discrimination. Consumers with high demand during peak hours, those who are willing to pay more for uninterrupted service, effectively self-select into the higher price bracket. Third-degree price discrimination. Finally, consider the simplest and most common form: third-degree price discrimination. Here, the policymaker divides consumers into distinct groups and charges different prices to each group. The classic example is student discounts or senior citizen fares. The assumption is that these groups have different demand elasticities. A movie theater might offer lower prices to students because students are generally more price sensitive than working adults. Similarly, offering cheaper electricity to industries during off-peak hours to incentivize them to utilize otherwise idle resources. Peak load pricing often overlaps with third-degree price discrimination, particularly when different time-of-day rates are offered to residential versus commercial customers. However, the primary focus of peak load pricing remains on reflecting the actual cost of provision at different times. Thus, peak load pricing, while appearing as a simple adjustment of prices, is deeply intertwined with the principles of price discrimination. It's a sophisticated mechanism for managing demand fluctuations, optimizing resource utilization, and improving overall economic efficiency. But consider this: if we can fine-tune pricing based on temporal demand, what other dimensions of consumer behavior might we leverage to further refine our allocation of resources? What novel frontiers of price optimization still await us? That, dear students, is a question for another evening. Chapter 17. Examples of second-degree price discrimination, utilities and amusement parks. Good evening. As we gently navigate the waters of price discrimination, we've already encountered the theoretical purity of first-degree discrimination, where the seller extracts every ounce of consumer surplus. And we've observed the more common, segmented approach of third-degree discrimination, distinguishing between identifiable groups with varying elasticities of demand. Tonight, we turn our attention to a subtly different phenomenon: second-degree price discrimination. Remember, the narrative landmark that guides us forward is the seller's degree of knowledge about the buyer. In first degree, perfect knowledge. In third degree, group knowledge. Now, in second degree, the seller possesses neither. Instead, the buyer's actions reveal their type. Second-degree price discrimination, also known as block pricing, emerges when a seller offers different prices based on the quantity consumed. The crucial element is that all consumers face the same price schedule. The self-selection mechanism is built into the quantity purchased. Think of it as a carefully designed menu, where each item implicitly reveals a preference. The key is that consumers choose the item that best suits their individual needs, unwittingly revealing their willingness to pay. Let's illuminate this concept with a common example: utilities. Consider the pricing structure of electricity. The classical economist, pondering the intricacies of optimal resource allocation, might observe a tiered pricing system. The first few kilowatt-hours consumed in a month are priced relatively cheaply. This caters to basic needs: lighting, refrigeration, demand for which is likely inelastic. As consumption increases, the price per kilowatt-hour rises. This accounts for discretionary use, air conditioning, electric heating, demand for which is more elastic. The policymaker, ever mindful of social welfare, may impose such a tiered system for fairness or to encourage conservation. Why does this constitute second-degree price discrimination? Because the electricity company doesn't know which consumers value electricity intensely and which are more price-sensitive. Instead, they offer a price schedule that allows consumers to reveal their type through their consumption patterns. Heavy users, who presumably value electricity more, end up paying a higher average price than light users. This isn't arbitrary. It's a carefully calibrated extraction of consumer surplus, albeit less precise than first-degree discrimination. Think of the current flowing through the wires, revealing its path of least resistance, much like the consumer revealing their preference. Another illuminating example can be found in the realm of leisure: amusement parks. Many amusement parks offer different types of tickets. A basic ticket might grant entry, but requires separate payment for each ride. A more expensive, all-inclusive ticket provides unlimited access to all rides. The key point is that both options are available to everyone. Those who anticipate riding many attractions, perhaps thrill seekers with a high willingness to pay, will likely opt for the all-inclusive ticket. Those who prefer a more leisurely experience or are on a tighter budget will likely choose the basic ticket and pay per ride. The park owner, without knowing in advance who is a thrill seeker and who is a casual visitor, extracts a greater portion of consumer surplus by offering this self-selection menu. It's a delicate balance, like an equilibrium in the marketplace, where the park maximizes revenue without alienating potential customers. Consider this pricing strategy as a form of information revelation. The amusement park owner, in their wisdom, has structured the pricing in such a way that it forces consumers to self-identify. The act of choosing the ticket is an act of communicating preference. It's not about the park staff knowing who loves roller coasters. It's about the customer demonstrating that love with their purchase. Crucially, remember the limitations. Second-degree price discrimination is imperfect. Some consumers who would have preferred the all-inclusive ticket might be deterred by the higher upfront cost, even if they would have ultimately consumed enough rides to make it worthwhile. This represents a loss of potential revenue. However, it's a more feasible and legally palatable approach than attempting to segment customers based on superficial characteristics. Think of the system as a sieve, filtering out those with a high willingness to pay, albeit with some unavoidable spillage. So, as we prepare to drift towards our next topic, contemplate this. What happens when the information asymmetry isn't about quantity, but about quality? How do sellers use product differentiation to achieve similar ends? That, my friends, is a question for another evening. For now, let the gentle currents of economic thought carry you to peaceful slumber. Chapter title, Chapter 18. The impact of second-degree price discrimination on consumer welfare. Content. Type, paragraph, text. Having traversed the landscape of first-degree price discrimination, where the purveyor extracts every last iota of consumer surplus, let us now turn our attention to a more nuanced, and perhaps a more common phenomenon, second-degree. Recall that in perfect price discrimination, each consumer is charged their maximum willingness to pay. This, while theoretically fascinating, often proves impractical due to the informational demands it places on the seller. The waters of the market rarely reveal individual valuations with such clarity. Second-degree price discrimination, on the other hand, adopts a more strategic approach, using quantity as a lever to unlock differential pricing. Type, paragraph, text. The essence of second-degree price discrimination lies in offering different prices based on the quantity consumed. Think of tiered pricing plans for utilities like electricity or water, where the per-unit cost decreases as consumption rises. Or consider buy one, get one half off promotions, or even bulk discounts offered by retailers. These are all manifestations of this pricing strategy. The seller, lacking perfect knowledge of individual consumer preferences, allows consumers to self-select into different pricing tiers based on their consumption habits. This indirect approach allows the seller to capture a portion of the consumer surplus without explicitly knowing each individual's willingness to pay. It's a subtle dance, a negotiation enacted through the structure of the pricing schedule. Type, paragraph, text. Now, the crucial question that occupies our minds tonight. What is the impact of second-degree price discrimination on consumer welfare? The answer, as is often the case in economics, is nuanced and context-dependent. Under certain circumstances, it can be argued that second-degree price discrimination enhances overall welfare compared to uniform pricing. Imagine a scenario where a firm producing a good with high fixed costs, like a railway, would be unable to operate profitably under a single price for all passengers. By offering discounted fares for off-peak travel or for bulk purchases, the railway can attract a wider range of customers, increasing overall ridership and potentially leading to a situation where the railway remains viable. The existence of the railway itself, in this case, represents a net benefit to society, even if some passengers pay different prices than others. Type, paragraph, text. However, the waters are not always so clear. The impact on individual consumer welfare is less straightforward. Consumers who purchase larger quantities at lower per-unit prices may indeed benefit from second-degree price discrimination, compared to a world where they could only purchase at a higher, uniform price. But consider the consumer who only requires a small amount of the good or service. They may end up paying a higher per-unit price than those who purchase in bulk. This creates a disparity, where the burden of subsidizing lower prices for large consumers falls upon the shoulders of small consumers. The question of fairness inevitably arises, prompting the policymaker to carefully consider the distributional effects of such pricing schemes. There's an intricate balancing act between ensuring the sustainability of the firm and safeguarding the interests of all consumers. Type, paragraph, text. Furthermore, the design of the pricing tiers is critical. Poorly designed pricing schemes can lead to inefficiencies, where consumers are incentivized to consume more than they truly desire simply to qualify for a lower per unit price. This can lead to waste and misallocation of resources, a situation that would undoubtedly displease the classical economist, who always values efficiency above all else. The firm must carefully calibrate the pricing structure to avoid unintended consequences, ensuring that the incentives created by the pricing scheme align with overall societal well-being. Type, paragraph, text. In essence, the impact of second-degree price discrimination on consumer welfare is a delicate balancing act. It can lead to increased output, greater accessibility, and overall welfare gains under specific conditions. However, it also presents the potential for inequities and inefficiencies if not carefully implemented. The key lies in striking a balance between the firm's need to generate revenue and the consumer's right to fair and equitable access to goods and services. A thoughtful consideration of the elasticity of demand among different consumer groups and the potential for strategic manipulation is paramount. Type, paragraph, text. As we conclude our exploration of second-degree price discrimination, it is important to remember that it represents just one facet of the larger landscape of pricing strategies. We have examined the subtle complexities of quantity-based pricing. We still have third-degree price discrimination to examine, a different kind of beast that lurks in the segmentation of markets. But before we fully dive into the final landscape of third-degree price discrimination, could there be a fourth? A more subtle and hidden method that is yet to be named? Chapter 19. Regulatory considerations and potential antitrust concerns. As we've seen in our meandering exploration of market structures, the pursuit of profit often leads firms to adopt strategies that, while rational from a business perspective, may raise eyebrows in the halls of regulatory agencies. Today, we turn our attention to one such area: price discrimination and its associated antitrust implications. Think of it as navigating a stream. Sometimes the current flows smoothly, and sometimes we encounter rapids and hidden rocks. Price discrimination, at its core, is the practice of charging different prices for the same product or service to different customers. It's a concept as old as commerce itself, but its modern manifestations, fueled by sophisticated data analysis and algorithmic pricing, demand careful scrutiny. We shall gently dissect the three principal degrees of price discrimination: first, second, and third. Each represents a different level of precision and, consequently, a different set of regulatory challenges. First-degree price discrimination, also known as perfect price discrimination, is the economist's ideal and the regulator's potential nightmare. Imagine a scenario where a firm knows the exact willingness to pay of each individual customer. It then charges each person the maximum they are willing to spend, extracting every last drop of consumer surplus. This, theoretically, maximizes the firm's profit. The classical economist might admire its efficiency, but the policymaker would likely raise concerns about fairness and distributional equity. After all, the consumer gains nothing, and all the value flows directly to the producer. In practice, perfect price discrimination is exceedingly rare. Think of bespoke tailoring or highly personalized consulting services, where the price is individually negotiated and tailored to the perceived value for each client. The regulatory challenge here lies in identifying and proving such practices, as they often masquerade as complex value assessments. Second-degree price discrimination involves charging different prices based on the quantity consumed. This is far more common and familiar. Think of bulk discounts, tiered pricing plans for utilities, or buy one, get one free offers. The firm doesn't know each individual's willingness to pay, but it segments the market based on consumption patterns. Those who consume more pay a lower price per unit, while those who consume less pay a higher price. The rationale is that those who consume more are often more price-sensitive, and the lower price incentivizes them to purchase even more. From a regulatory standpoint, second-degree price discrimination is generally viewed with less suspicion than first-degree. It often leads to increased overall output and can benefit some consumers through lower prices. However, the policymaker might still be concerned if the pricing structure is designed to unfairly disadvantage smaller consumers, or if it creates barriers to entry for competing firms. Third-degree price discrimination involves dividing the market into distinct segments, each with its own price. Students, seniors, and travelers often benefit from discounted fares. Geographic segmentation, with different prices charged in different regions, also falls under this category. Here, the firm relies on readily identifiable characteristics to differentiate customer groups and charges prices based on the perceived price elasticity of demand in each segment. This is perhaps the most prevalent form of price discrimination. It's the movie ticket price, lower for matinee showings, or the student discount on software. The potential antitrust concerns arise when these market segmentations are based on factors that are discriminatory in nature, such as race or religion, or when they are used to create artificial barriers to competition. The policymaker must assess whether the segmentation is justified by genuine differences in demand elasticity, or whether it is being used to unfairly exploit certain groups. All three degrees of price discrimination present unique challenges for antitrust enforcement. Now, the fundamental question is whether the practice in question enhances or harms overall welfare. Does it lead to increased output and lower prices for some consumers? Or does it simply transfer wealth from consumers to producers, while potentially stifling competition? The answers, of course, are rarely clear-cut. The legal landscape is a complex tapestry of statutes and precedents, requiring a careful balancing of economic efficiency and social equity. Each case must be assessed on its own merits, considering the specific market context, the nature of the product or service, and the potential impact on consumers and competitors. As we drift towards the conclusion of this chapter, consider this. Are our current regulatory frameworks sufficient to address the challenges posed by increasingly sophisticated forms of price discrimination enabled by artificial intelligence and big data? Or are we entering a new era where traditional antitrust principles need to be re-evaluated to maintain a fair and competitive marketplace in this digital age? As our economic journey continues, we will move on to consider Chapter 20, Introduction to Third-Degree Price Discrimination. Segmenting the market. Good evening. We've explored the foundational aspects of pricing, understanding how supply and demand intertwine to establish equilibrium. Now, we gently shift our focus to a more nuanced territory: price discrimination. Remember, the fundamental principle we hold dear is that resources and their allocation significantly dictate the health of the market and consequently the world. So we must understand the delicate balances that maintain its vitality. Price discrimination, at its heart, is the practice of charging different prices to different consumers for the same good or service. It's a divergence from the idealized world of uniform pricing, and as such, demands careful scrutiny. Tonight, we begin our exploration of this multifaceted phenomenon by focusing on the most prevalent form: third-degree price discrimination. Before we delve into the specifics of third-degree price discrimination, it's helpful to briefly contextualize it within the broader framework of price discrimination strategies. Economists generally categorize price discrimination into three distinct degrees, each representing a different level of market segmentation and information asymmetry. First-degree price discrimination, often called perfect price discrimination, represents the theoretical ideal for the seller. Imagine a scenario where the seller knows exactly how much each individual consumer is willing to pay for a product. They then charge each consumer precisely their maximum willingness to pay. This extracts the entirety of the consumer surplus, leaving the consumer with virtually no benefit beyond acquiring the good itself. It's akin to carefully siphoning all the water from a pool, leaving the pool practically empty. While theoretically interesting, perfect price discrimination is rarely observed in its purest form, as it requires perfect knowledge, an impossibility in most real-world scenarios. Second-degree price discrimination, on the other hand, involves charging different prices based on the quantity consumed. Think of tiered pricing structures, like bulk discounts or electricity rates that vary depending on usage. The consumer self-selects into different pricing tiers, revealing their preferences through their consumption patterns. This approach allows the seller to capture some of the consumer surplus without needing to know each individual's willingness to pay directly. It's like offering different-sized buckets, allowing consumers to select what's best for them and paying accordingly. This brings us to our primary focus: third-degree price discrimination. This is where a seller divides their customer base into distinct groups or segments, and then charges each segment a different price. The key here is that the segments must be separated in some meaningful way that prevents arbitrage. That is, preventing customers from one segment buying at the lower price and reselling to customers in the higher price segment. Consider, for example, airline tickets. Airlines often charge different prices for the same flight based on factors like the time of booking, the day of the week, or the presence of a Saturday night stay. Business travelers, who often need to book last minute and have less flexibility in their travel schedules, are typically willing to pay more. Leisure travelers, on the other hand, are often more price sensitive and willing to book in advance and travel on less desirable days. The airline effectively segments its market and charges different prices to these different groups. Think of it like damming parts of a river to allocate it to multiple populations for multiple purposes, ensuring everyone can make use of the water. Another common example is student discounts. Businesses recognize that students, on average, have lower incomes and are more price sensitive. By offering discounts, they can attract this segment of the market without having to lower prices for all customers. This allows them to capture some additional revenue from students who might not otherwise be able to afford their products or services. The success of third-degree price discrimination hinges on several key factors. First, the seller must be able to identify and separate distinct customer segments. Second, they must be able to prevent arbitrage between these segments. And third, the segments must have different price elasticities of demand. In essence, the segments must respond differently to price changes. The segment with a more inelastic demand can be charged a higher price, while the segment with a more elastic demand will be charged a lower price. The classical economist would point out that this practice is profitable because it allows the seller to extract more consumer surplus than they could with a uniform pricing strategy. The policymaker must ask, but is it fair? This is the central question we must grapple with when analyzing this mechanism. Third-degree price discrimination is pervasive in our economy, from movie tickets to prescription drugs. Understanding its underlying principles is essential for both businesses and consumers. It's a subtle dance of pricing strategies, market segmentation, and demand elasticity. As we conclude, consider this. What are the ethical implications of third-degree price discrimination? Is it always justifiable to charge different prices to different groups? Or are there limits to this practice? This question will serve as a bridge to our next discussion, where we delve deeper into the complexities and consequences of this intricate pricing strategy. Chapter 21. Identifying and targeting different customer segments. Yes. We've traversed the landscape of market structures, observing the ebb and flow of competition. Now, our attention turns to a more nuanced maneuver. A strategic dance performed by firms seeking to maximize their returns by understanding the subtle variations within their customer base. Price discrimination. Tonight, we'll explore its mechanisms, a trio of elegantly distinct approaches: first, second, and third-degree price discrimination. Think of the market not as a single uniform entity, but as a mosaic. Each tile represents a customer, and each customer holds a different willingness to pay. Some are eager, deeply valuing the product. Others are more hesitant, their valuation hovering closer to the cost of production. Price discrimination, at its heart, is the art of extracting as much value as possible from each tile in this mosaic. Let us begin with first-degree price discrimination, sometimes referred to as perfect price discrimination. Imagine, if you will, a skilled negotiator able to discern the absolute maximum a customer is willing to pay and then charge precisely that amount. In this idealized scenario, the firm captures all the consumer surplus. The buyer receives no deal, no feeling of having secured a bargain. Each transaction is a perfect reflection of the buyer's inherent valuation. Consider the example of a bespoke tailoring service. The tailor, through careful consultation and understanding of the client's desires and financial capacity, might quote a price that perfectly aligns with the client's perceived value of the garment. This is, of course, a theoretical ideal. Perfect information about each customer's willingness to pay is rarely, if ever, attainable. It represents a limiting case, a benchmark against which we can measure other, more practical forms of price discrimination. Next, we move to second-degree price discrimination. This method acknowledges the firm's imperfect knowledge of individual customer preferences. Instead of individually negotiating prices, the firm offers different options, allowing customers to self-select into different pricing tiers. This is the realm of quantity discounts, bundled products, and tiered service plans. Think of the utilities companies. They often offer tiered pricing for electricity usage, a lower rate for the initial block of kilowatt hours, followed by progressively higher rates for subsequent usage. Customers who consume less electricity, perhaps those with smaller homes or more energy-efficient appliances, pay a lower average price per kilowatt hour. Those who consume more, larger households perhaps, pay a higher average price. The utility doesn't know each customer's precise willingness to pay, but it structures its pricing in a way that allows customers to reveal their preferences through their consumption choices. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination. This strategy involves dividing the market into distinct segments based on observable characteristics and then charging different prices to each segment. These characteristics might include age, location, student status, or membership in a particular group. A common example is student discounts at movie theaters or museums. Students, as a group, typically have a lower willingness to pay than working professionals. By offering a discounted price, the establishment can attract students who might not otherwise attend, while still charging a higher price to those who are willing to pay more. Similarly, airlines often charge different prices for the same flight depending on when the ticket is purchased, recognizing that business travelers, who often book flights closer to the departure date, are generally less price-sensitive than leisure travelers who book well in advance. It is important to note that the effectiveness of third-degree price discrimination hinges on the firm's ability to prevent arbitrage, the practice of buying the product at a lower price in one segment and reselling it at a higher price in another. Were students able to purchase discounted movie tickets and then resell them to non-students at a profit, the airline's pricing strategy would quickly unravel. These three mechanisms, first, second, and third-degree price discrimination, represent a spectrum of approaches to capturing value from diverse customer bases. Each strategy carries its own set of challenges and opportunities, and the optimal approach will depend on the specific characteristics of the market and the firm's capabilities. As we conclude this exploration of price discrimination, we might ponder: beyond these explicit pricing strategies, are there more subtle, less obvious ways in which firms segment their markets and tailor their offering? What role does product differentiation play in achieving similar ends, blurring the lines between competitive pricing and strategic value extraction? That, perhaps, is a question for another evening. Chapter 22. Geographical Price Discrimination. Regional differences. We've explored the foundational mechanisms of price discrimination, those subtle levers that allow a seller to extract more value than a single uniform price would allow. Before we move on to the ethical dimensions of these practices, let us consider a particular manifestation of third-degree price discrimination: geographical pricing. This is where the dance of supply and demand takes on a regional flavor, sculpted by the unique characteristics of each marketplace. Geographical price discrimination, in essence, is charging different prices for the same product or service in different geographical locations. This isn't merely about accounting for transport costs, though those certainly play a role. It's about recognizing and exploiting the varying price sensitivities and demand elasticities that exist from region to region. Think of it as a tuning fork, vibrating at a different frequency depending on the density and texture of the surrounding air. To understand this better, let's revisit our 3 degrees of price discrimination. Imagine a hypothetical software company selling its latest operating system. First degree, or perfect price discrimination, would theoretically involve the company knowing each individual customer's maximum willingness to pay in each location and charging them exactly that amount. This is rarely achievable in practice due to information asymmetry and the practical difficulties of individualized pricing at scale. It remains, however, a theoretical ideal, a perfectly efficient but perhaps ethically questionable landscape. Second-degree price discrimination, in the geographical context, manifests as regional pricing tiers. The software company might offer different bundles of features or service levels at varying price points depending on the region. Perhaps a region with a high concentration of small businesses receives a package tailored to their needs at a lower cost than the comprehensive enterprise solution offered in a metropolitan area. This is akin to a segmented river, flowing through different channels carved by the local terrain. The volume remains roughly the same, but the distribution varies. It is, however, third-degree price discrimination that truly shines when discussing geographical distinctions. Here, the firm identifies distinct geographical markets with varying demand curves and separates them. Consider pharmaceutical companies. They might sell the same drug at a significantly lower price in developing countries compared to developed ones. This isn't solely altruistic, it's a calculated strategy. The demand in developing countries is likely to be more price-sensitive due to lower average incomes. By charging a lower price, the company can capture a larger market share and increase overall profits, even if the profit margin per unit is smaller. The separation of these markets is maintained through import-export restrictions, regulations, or simply the sheer logistical difficulty of large-scale arbitrage. Several factors contribute to the viability of geographical price discrimination. First, there must be barriers to arbitrage. Customers in a low-price region must be unable to easily resell the product in a high-price region. These barriers can be natural, such as physical distance and transportation costs, or artificial, such as tariffs and regulations. Imagine a dam preventing the free flow of water between two reservoirs. The difference in water level represents the price differential. Second, the firm must be able to identify and segment these markets effectively. Market research, demographic data, and understanding local consumer behavior are crucial. Knowing the contours of the economic landscape is paramount. Consider how a retail chain prices its products differently in urban and rural locations, adjusting to local income levels and competition. Third, there must be significant differences in demand elasticity between the markets. If demand is relatively inelastic in all regions, there's little point in price discrimination. The gains from charging higher prices in some regions would be offset by the loss of sales in others. The policymaker must be aware of this elasticity when considering how to regulate such practices. Often, they must weigh the benefits of allowing firms to reach a wider range of customers against the potential for exploitation in regions with limited purchasing power. The classical economist, ever the champion of efficiency, might argue that geographical price discrimination can lead to a more optimal allocation of resources, allowing goods and services to reach consumers who would otherwise be priced out of the market. Conversely, critics might point to the potential for exploitation and the ethical implications of charging different prices based on arbitrary geographical boundaries. Geographical price discrimination is a complex and nuanced strategy. It is a delicate balancing act between maximizing profits and serving the needs of diverse consumer bases. It requires careful consideration of market dynamics, regulatory constraints, and ethical considerations. It is a reflection of how the forces of supply and demand interact in a world that is far from homogeneous, a world that is beautifully and frustratingly varied. But what happens when these geographical distinctions begin to blur? What happens when online marketplaces collapse the distances and arbitrage becomes increasingly easy? How do firms adapt their strategies to this new, interconnected world? This, perhaps, is a thread we can explore further in our next session. Age-based discounts, senior and student pricing. Welcome, once again, to our quiet contemplation of economic principles. We've previously explored the subtleties of bundling and product differentiation. Now, let's gently shift our focus to a fascinating and often overlooked facet of pricing strategy: age-based discounts. Specifically, we'll unravel why businesses offer preferential pricing to seniors and students, and how this practice neatly fits into the larger framework of price discrimination. At its core, price discrimination is the practice of selling the same product or service at different prices to different customers. This isn't arbitrary, of course. It's driven by the desire to extract greater profit by capturing more consumer surplus, that delightful space between what a consumer is willing to pay and what they actually do pay. The economic literature classifies price discrimination into 3 distinct degrees, each representing a different level of sophistication in extracting consumer surplus. Imagine them as progressive refinement techniques, like separating gold from ore. First-degree price discrimination, sometimes called perfect price discrimination, is the theoretical ideal. Picture a market where the seller knows exactly how much each individual consumer is willing to pay and charges them precisely that amount. Each transaction becomes a miniature negotiation, extracting every penny of potential value. Think of a bespoke tailor who understands each client's unique preferences and budget, crafting a perfectly priced suit for each. In reality, perfect price discrimination is nearly impossible to achieve because it requires perfect knowledge of each customer's willingness to pay, which is information rarely, if ever, obtainable. Second-degree price discrimination involves charging different prices based on the quantity consumed. Volume discounts are a prime example. Utilities often employ tiered pricing, charging a lower rate per kilowatt hour for higher levels of consumption. This allows them to tap into the diverse demand curves of different customer segments. Those with high demand, perhaps due to large families or energy-intensive businesses, benefit from the bulk rate, while those with lower demand pay a higher per-unit price. The beauty here lies in the seller not needing to know individual preferences. The consumers self-select based on their consumption patterns. Third-degree price discrimination, and the one most relevant to our discussion of senior and student discounts, involves segmenting the market into distinct groups and charging different prices to each group. This segmentation is typically based on observable characteristics, age, location, or membership status, for example, that are correlated with different price elasticities of demand. Price elasticity of demand, as you may recall, measures how much the quantity demanded of a good or service changes in response to a change in its price. Seniors and students often have more elastic demand curves than the general population. That is, they are more price sensitive. This can be attributed to factors such as lower disposable incomes, fixed retirement budgets, or the presence of alternative options. Recognizing this, businesses can increase their overall profitability by offering discounts to these groups. While they may earn less revenue from each individual senior or student transaction, the increased volume of sales more than compensates for the lower price. The theater showing movies may not make as much off seniors, but it will fill more seats if prices are dropped. They wouldn't fill seats at higher prices. The challenge, of course, lies in preventing arbitrage, preventing those who receive the discount from reselling to those who don't. This is where the observable characteristics come into play. Requiring proof of age or student status acts as a barrier, limiting the discount to its intended target group. From an ethical standpoint, age-based discounts are generally viewed favorably. They can be seen as a way to make essential goods and services more accessible to vulnerable populations. From a business perspective, they're a strategic tool for maximizing profits in a heterogeneous market. So, as we gently reach the close of this chapter, we have considered first, second, and third-degree price discrimination. We've seen how businesses subtly manipulate prices to better capture consumer surplus, and how even seemingly benign practices like senior and student discounts are rooted in fundamental economic principles. It leaves us pondering, what happens when we move beyond pricing fixed goods and start to grapple with the pricing of intangible services, where the experience itself becomes part of the product? What new dimensions of price discrimination emerge in that context? We shall explore that in due course. Time-based pricing, early bird specials, and happy hours good evening. We've considered, in our previous explorations, the ways businesses navigate the landscape of varying consumer demand. Tonight, we delve deeper into a fascinating facet of pricing strategy, time-based discrimination. Specifically, we'll explore how practices like early bird specials and happy hours represent clever applications of what economists term first, second, and third-degree price discrimination. Think of it as a gentle current, shaping the flow of consumer behavior. Now, let's begin with the purest form, first-degree price discrimination. This, theoretically, is the holy grail of pricing for a seller. Imagine a merchant who knows exactly what each customer is willing to pay for a product or service. They extract the maximum willingness to pay from everyone. It's like perfectly calibrating a scale to weigh the desires of each individual. This is also sometimes called perfect price discrimination. The implications, of course, are profound. The classical economist would tell us that, in theory, all consumer surplus, that lovely space between what a consumer is willing to pay and what they actually pay, vanishes, flowing directly into the pockets of the seller. In reality, first-degree price discrimination is exceedingly rare. Its feasibility demands near-perfect information, often attainable only in highly personalized or negotiated transactions. A bespoke tailor, perhaps, or a skilled negotiator haggling over the price of an antique. Early bird specials and happy hours don't quite achieve this perfection, but they nudge us in that direction. The restaurant offering a discount for diners arriving before 6 p.m. is, in essence, recognizing that some customers are more sensitive to price and willing to dine earlier to capture the saving. They are approximating the individualized pricing of first-degree discrimination, albeit coarsely. Next, we consider second-degree price discrimination. Here, the seller doesn't know each individual's willingness to pay, but does know that consumers differ in their preferences and consumption habits. The strategy then becomes about offering different bundles or quantities at varying prices, allowing consumers to self-select. Think of tiered data plans for mobile phones, or bulk discounts at a warehouse store. The policymaker might view this as a way to broaden access to services by providing discounted options to consumers with budget constraints. Again, early bird specials and happy hours exhibit elements of this. While not precisely bundling, they offer a time-limited variant of the core product at a reduced price. Consumers who value price over timing choose the discounted option, essentially sorting themselves into different price tiers based on their preferences. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination. This is perhaps the most common and readily observable form. Here, the seller divides its market into identifiable groups with differing price elasticities of demand. Students, seniors, tourists, and charges each group a different price. A key assumption here is that these groups can be easily segmented, and arbitrage is difficult to prevent. Early bird specials and happy hours can also be seen through this lens. The group being targeted is those with flexible schedules or those highly sensitive to price changes. The time of day acts as the distinguishing characteristic, almost creating artificial segments within the customer base. A bar offering half-price appetizers during happy hour is, in effect, acknowledging that at certain times, demand is less price insensitive. The goal is to boost traffic during periods of low demand, without undercutting the prices paid by those less price-sensitive who visit during peak hours. Notice how each of these mechanisms operates on the delicate balance between supply and demand. The seller attempts to capture more consumer surplus by strategically shaping the pricing landscape. It's a dance, a constant calibration based on observation and analysis. These concepts, while seemingly abstract, have very real implications for the prices we pay and the choices we make every day. So, as we reflect on these time-based pricing strategies, consider the ethical dimensions. Are these mechanisms simply clever marketing tactics, or do they exploit consumer behavior in some way? What role does transparency play in ensuring fairness? And as we continue our exploration, what other subtle, yet pervasive, forms of price discrimination might we uncover in the vast and ever-evolving marketplace? Chapter 25. Versioning. Creating differentiated products for different segments. Having explored the landscape of bundling, we now turn our attention to another powerful tool in the economist's arsenal: versioning. Versioning, at its heart, is about crafting differentiated products to cater to distinct segments of the market. It's a more nuanced approach than simply setting a single price for a homogeneous good. Think of it as subtly tuning the frequencies of a radio receiver to capture different signals, different desires. And, much like the radio's selective reception, this often intertwines with the concept of price discrimination, carefully calibrating prices to extract the most value from each customer. The core of price discrimination lies in understanding that not all consumers are created equal. Their willingness to pay for a product or service varies based on their needs, their circumstances, and perhaps most importantly, their perceived value. Price discrimination, when implemented thoughtfully, is not necessarily a villainous act. It can expand access to goods and services, making them available to those who might otherwise be priced out. It's a delicate balancing act, a finely tuned lever that, when used judiciously, can benefit both the producer and consumer. Let us delve into the 3 classic degrees of price discrimination. First-degree price discrimination, sometimes called perfect price discrimination, is the theoretical zenith. Imagine a world where a seller knows exactly how much each individual customer is willing to pay and charges them precisely that amount. The classical economist might envision a skilled artisan who can discern the deepest desires of each patron, tailoring their offering and price accordingly. In this ideal scenario, the seller captures the entire consumer surplus, leaving the buyer with just enough benefit to make the purchase worthwhile. This is, of course, exceptionally difficult to achieve in practice. The information requirements are immense, and the potential for customer resentment is high. Think of haggling in a bazaar, elevated to a scientific art form. It's rarely observed in its pure form, but serves as a useful benchmark. Second-degree price discrimination involves offering different versions of a product or service, allowing customers to self-select based on their willingness to pay. This is where versioning truly shines. Consider the airline industry. They offer a spectrum of seating options: economy, premium economy, business class, and first class. Each class represents a different version of the same fundamental service, transportation from point A to point B, but with varying levels of comfort, amenities, and flexibility. Customers choose the option that best aligns with their needs and budget. The policymaker understands that this strategy leverages the diverse valuations within the customer base. It acknowledges that some are willing to pay a premium for comfort and convenience, while others prioritize affordability. This approach relies on the consumer's own decision-making process to segment themselves, a form of indirect revelation of their preferences. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, perhaps the most commonly observed form. This involves dividing the market into distinct groups and charging different prices to each group. A classic example is student discounts or senior citizen rates. The market is segmented based on identifiable characteristics, and the seller assumes that these characteristics correlate with different price sensitivities. The university administrator, for example, offers reduced tuition to in-state residents, acknowledging that these students may have fewer alternative options and therefore a higher price elasticity of demand. Movie theaters charging different prices for matinee and evening screenings also employ third-degree price discrimination. This approach relies on identifying groups with distinct demand curves and setting prices accordingly to maximize overall revenue. Versioning, therefore, serves as a crucial mechanism in facilitating these degrees of price discrimination, particularly second and third degree. By carefully crafting different versions of a product, sellers can tap into the diverse needs and preferences of their customer base, extracting more value and potentially expanding access to goods and services. But as we navigate this intricate landscape of versioning and price discrimination, a question lingers. How does the digital realm, with its near-zero marginal cost of production and its unprecedented ability to personalize offerings, further complicate, or perhaps simplify, these economic principles? We will explore that in our next discussion. Chapter 26. The Economics of Third-Degree Price Discrimination. Profit Maximization. Good evening. How or why? We've previously explored the fundamental conditions necessary for price discrimination to even be possible. Now, let us gently navigate the terrain of third-degree price discrimination and its intricacies regarding profit maximization. Think of it as adjusting a delicate balance, optimizing for the best possible outcome within certain constraints. Recall our map. Price discrimination, in its essence, is the practice of charging different prices to different consumers for the same good or service. This, of course, is only feasible if certain conditions are met. Most importantly, the firm must possess market power, allowing it the autonomy to set prices, and furthermore, it must be able to segment its market into groups with differing price elasticities of demand. Third-degree price discrimination, the most common type we encounter in the world around us, hinges on exactly this segmentation. The firm identifies distinct groups, perhaps students versus non-students, locals versus tourists, and charges them different prices. The aim, naturally, is to extract as much consumer surplus as possible, and therefore maximize profit. Now, how does a firm employing third-degree price discrimination determine the optimal prices for each segment? It's a question of marginal revenue and marginal cost, a familiar refrain in the symphony of economics. The guiding principle remains: produce until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. However, with price discrimination, the firm must consider the marginal revenue for each segment of the market. The classical economist would emphasize that profit is maximized when marginal revenue in segment A equals marginal revenue in segment B, and both equal the overall marginal cost of production. Let's unpack this idea gently. Imagine a cinema chain offering discounted tickets to students. The student segment has a more elastic demand. They are more sensitive to price changes. A small increase in price would lead to a larger decrease in the quantity of tickets they purchase. Conversely, the non-student segment, perhaps less sensitive to price, has a more inelastic demand. A small price increase here would have a smaller impact on the quantity demanded. The cinema chain, to maximize its profits, will set a lower price for students, boosting their ticket sales, and a higher price for non-students, capitalizing on their relative price insensitivity. The crucial point is that the marginal revenue generated from the last ticket sold to a student must be equal to the marginal revenue from the last ticket sold to a non-student. And, as always, these should align with the marginal cost of showing the film. If the marginal revenue from selling to the non-student group exceeds that of the student group, it indicates that a slight price reduction for non-students and consequent increase in quantity demanded would be profitable. Mathematically, this can be expressed as NJRAA, KP, HEB, POM, NJRED, where MSJREA is the marginal revenue in segment A, ester marginal revenue in segment B, and ME is the marginal cost. Reaching this equilibrium requires a careful understanding of the demand curves in each market segment and a keen awareness of the cost structure of the firm. The implications are clear. Third-degree price discrimination allows firms to increase their overall profits compared to charging a single price to all consumers. It transforms what would have been consumer surplus, the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and what they actually pay, into producer surplus, enriching the firm. Of course, this raises questions of equity and fairness. The policymaker might ponder whether the benefits to the firm justify the potential for some consumers to be disadvantaged. Is it fair that locals pay less than tourists? Is it justified that students receive discounts unavailable to working adults? These are not purely economic questions. They involve ethical considerations and societal values. Furthermore, the practice of third-degree price discrimination requires the ability to prevent arbitrage. If students could easily resell their discounted tickets to non-students, the entire scheme would collapse. The firm must implement measures to ensure that the different market segments remain separate and that price differences are maintained. We've explored the mechanics of third-degree price discrimination and its implications for profit maximization. We've seen how firms leverage differing price elasticities of demand to increase their overall earnings. But what happens when firms refine their strategies further? What happens when they move beyond segmenting broad groups and attempt to charge each individual consumer their maximum willingness to pay? What new complexities arise, and what does it mean for economic efficiency and social welfare? These are the questions we shall contemplate as we move forward, gently towards the fascinating realm of first-degree price discrimination. Until then, good night. Examples of third-degree price discrimination. Airlines and movie theaters tonight. Our focus rests upon third-degree price discrimination, the most prevalent and readily observable form. Recall that this involves dividing consumers into groups based on identifiable characteristics and charging different prices to each group. The key here is the ability to segment the market and prevent arbitrage, preventing those who pay the lower price from reselling to those who would otherwise pay the higher price. Let us consider, first, the fascinating case of airlines. The airline industry offers a masterclass in third-degree price discrimination. Think, for a moment, about the vast array of fares available for the very same seat on the very same flight. Some passengers pay a premium, while others secure their tickets at a significantly reduced cost. What mechanisms are at play? The primary segmentation strategy revolves around price elasticity of demand. Business travelers, for example, typically exhibit a lower price elasticity. Their travel is often time-sensitive and essential for their work. They are less likely to be deterred by higher prices, as the cost of not traveling can be substantial. Leisure travelers, on the other hand, tend to be more price-sensitive. They have greater flexibility in their travel dates and destinations, and are more likely to postpone or cancel their trip if prices are too high. Therefore, airlines target business travelers with higher fares and leisure travelers with discounted tickets. How do they achieve this segmentation? Several techniques are employed. Advance purchase restrictions, for example, are common. Tickets purchased weeks or months in advance are typically cheaper than those bought closer to the departure date. This effectively targets leisure travelers who plan their trips well in advance. Saturday night stay requirements serve a similar purpose. Business travelers are less likely to stay over a Saturday night, as they typically return home for the weekend. This restriction therefore filters out a significant portion of the business travel market, allowing airlines to offer lower fares to the more price-sensitive leisure segment. Furthermore, airlines offer different classes of service: first class, business class, and economy class, each with its own pricing structure. These classes cater to different levels of willingness to pay, with business travelers often opting for the premium classes for added comfort and flexibility. Now, let us turn our attention to movie theaters. This seemingly simple industry also practices third-degree price discrimination, albeit in a less complex manner than airlines. The most common example is the pricing difference between matinee and evening showings. Matinee showings, typically held during the day, cater to a different segment of the population than evening showings. Students, retirees, and stay-at-home parents are more likely to attend matinee showings, and these groups generally have a lower willingness to pay than working adults who attend evening shows. The movie theater, therefore, charges lower prices for matinee showings to capture this price-sensitive segment. They are willing to accept a lower profit margin per ticket during the day to increase overall attendance and revenue. This strategy is effective because arbitrage is difficult. It's not practical for someone to buy a matinee ticket and then resell it to someone attending an evening show. The timing and ticket validation processes prevent such behavior. Furthermore, movie theaters often offer discounts to specific groups, such as students or seniors. These discounts are based on the assumption that these groups have a lower ability or willingness to pay. By offering discounted tickets, movie theaters can attract a larger audience and increase their overall revenue. In both the airline and movie theater examples, the fundamental principle of third-degree price discrimination remains the same. Identify distinct groups of consumers with differing price elasticities of demand and charge them different prices accordingly. Preventing arbitrage is crucial for the success of this strategy. These examples, like gentle eddies in a larger economic stream, illustrate the pervasive nature of third-degree price discrimination in our everyday lives. Businesses continually seek ways to refine their pricing strategies to maximize profits, and understanding the principles of price discrimination allows us to better understand these strategies. Chapter 28. The Role of Arbitrage. Preventing resale between segments. Having explored the theoretical landscapes of price discrimination, we now turn to a practical concern that often tempers its effectiveness: arbitrage. Like water finding the path of least resistance, goods and services can flow from one segment of the market to another, undermining the carefully constructed price differentials envisioned by the discerning firm. Arbitrage, in essence, is the exploitation of price differences for the same good or service across different markets. Imagine two pools connected by a channel. If the water level is higher in one pool, water will naturally flow to the other until equilibrium is reached. Similarly, if a firm attempts to charge a lower price to one group of consumers and a higher price to another, entrepreneurial individuals, or even the consumers themselves, may buy the good at the lower price and resell it to those willing to pay more. This resale disrupts the firm's price discrimination strategy. To fully grasp the implications, let us revisit the 3 degrees of price discrimination: first, second, and third. The classical economist envisioned first degree, or perfect, price discrimination as the ideal. Here, the firm extracts the maximum willingness to pay from each individual consumer. However, the existence of arbitrage renders this nearly impossible. If one consumer is charged significantly less than another, the former could simply purchase additional units and resell them to the latter, capturing some of the firm's potential profit. The firm's carefully crafted individual prices crumble under the weight of the market's inherent tendency toward a uniform price. Second-degree price discrimination, involving quantity discounts or tiered pricing, faces a similar, though often less severe, challenge. Consider a utility company charging different rates for different levels of electricity consumption. Large industrial consumers might purchase electricity at the lower initial rate and then resell it to smaller residential customers, again undercutting the firm's pricing scheme. Preventing this requires careful monitoring and potentially technological barriers, things that may be imperfect, costly, or even impossible to implement. In essence, the firm must construct a dam to prevent the arbitrage river from flowing, and dams are rarely completely impervious. Third-degree price discrimination, the most common form, relies on segmenting the market into groups with different price elasticities of demand. This often involves geographic separation or demographic targeting. For example, a pharmaceutical company might charge lower prices in developing countries where demand is more price-sensitive and higher prices in developed countries where demand is more inelastic. But arbitrage poses a significant threat. Individuals or businesses could purchase the drug in the developing country and resell it in the developed country, eroding the price differential. The firm must then erect barriers to prevent this cross-border trade. These barriers might involve legal restrictions, such as patents and trademarks, or physical measures, like specialized packaging or distribution networks. The effectiveness of price discrimination, therefore, hinges on the firm's ability to prevent arbitrage. The policymaker understands that these barriers come at a cost. Legal restrictions can create inefficiencies and stifle competition. Physical measures can add to production and distribution expenses. The firm must weigh the potential gains from price discrimination against the costs of preventing resale. The decision becomes a delicate balancing act, a search for the optimal point where the flow of profit maximizes the overall return. Often, the most effective anti-arbitrage strategies involve making resale difficult or unattractive. This might include warranties that are non-transferable, services that are personalized and cannot be easily resold, or products that are perishable or difficult to transport. Think of a haircut. It's difficult to resell a partially used haircut. Ultimately, the prevalence of arbitrage influences the types of price discrimination that are viable. When resale is easy, firms are likely to favor second-degree strategies, such as quantity discounts, which are less susceptible to arbitrage than first-degree or third-degree approaches. They create a sort of economic friction, slowing and hindering the arbitrage process. So, as we conclude this examination, we are left with a lingering question. How do firms continue to creatively adapt their pricing strategies in the face of ever-evolving arbitrage techniques? And what are the long-term implications for market efficiency and consumer welfare as these strategies develop? As these strategies develop. Chapter 29. The Impact of Third-Degree Price. Discrimination on social welfare. We've explored the theoretical landscapes of perfect price discrimination, the realm where each individual consumer pays their maximum willingness to pay. A fascinating, if somewhat utopian, ideal. Now, Let's descend from that abstract peak to a more grounded plateau. Third-degree price discrimination. Here, we'll examine its effects on the well-being of society as a whole, a topic that sparks considerable debate amongst those who study the ebb and flow of markets. Third-degree price discrimination, as we recall, involves segmenting the market into identifiable groups, each with differing price elasticities of demand. Think of a theater charging students a lower price than general admission, or a pharmaceutical company selling a drug at a lower cost in a developing nation. The firm, acting as a rational agent, aims to maximize profit by exploiting these differences in demand. But what does this mean for overall social welfare? The answer, as is often the case in economics, is nuanced. It is not a simple equation, but rather a delicate balancing act between competing forces. To understand this, we must consider the concepts of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the elusive concept of deadweight loss. Consumer surplus, that intangible benefit enjoyed by consumers when they pay less than they were willing to, may increase or decrease depending on the specifics of the market segmentation. In some market segments, particularly those with higher price sensitivity, the price may fall, leading to an increase in consumer surplus for those consumers. Others may experience a price hike, reducing their consumer surplus or even pricing them out of the market altogether. It's a redistribution of value, not necessarily a net gain or loss in itself. Producer surplus. The profit accruing to the firm almost invariably increases under third-degree price discrimination. The firm, after all, is undertaking this strategy to enhance its profitability. By extracting more value from each segment of the market, it expands its own economic pie. This increased producer surplus can, in turn, be reinvested, potentially leading to innovation and further market developments. However, the question remains, at whose expense does this enhanced profit come? This brings us to the crucial concept of deadweight loss. Deadweight loss represents the loss of economic efficiency that occurs when the equilibrium for a good or service is not Pareto optimal. In simpler terms, it's the value that disappears because not all mutually beneficial transactions occur. Under third-degree price discrimination, the impact on deadweight loss is ambiguous. It depends on whether the total output increases or decreases compared to a single-price monopoly. Consider a scenario where the firm, under a single price regime, finds it unprofitable to serve a particular market segment due to high costs or low demand. Under third-degree price discrimination, if the firm lowers the price in that segment, making it profitable to serve, output increases. This reduces deadweight loss, as more consumers are now benefiting from the good or service. In essence, third-degree price discrimination might expand the market, bringing benefits to previously excluded consumers and reducing inefficiencies. The policymaker might see this as a positive outcome, even if it means some consumers in other segments pay more. Conversely, if the firm reduces output overall under price discrimination, perhaps by drastically raising prices in some segments, while only slightly lowering them in others, deadweight loss can increase. This occurs when the reduction in consumption in the high-price segment outweighs the increase in consumption in the low-price segment. The classical economist would frown upon this outcome, viewing it as a distortion of the market and a loss of overall economic efficiency. Ultimately, the impact of third-degree price discrimination on social welfare is an empirical question, not a theoretical certainty. It hinges on the specific demand elasticities of each market segment, the firm's cost structure, and the resulting output levels. There is no universal answer, no simple pronouncement of good or evil. It is a complex interaction of market forces, with winners and losers, gains and losses. As we contemplate this intricate dance of prices and welfare, a question naturally arises. How do regulatory bodies approach this landscape? What tools and policies are available to steer these complex systems towards a more equitable outcome? That, friends, is a matter for our next exploration, when we delve into the regulatory challenges and policy implications of these varied forms of price discrimination. Until then, allow these thoughts to settle, to find their place in the quiet corners of your mind. Chapter 30. The legality of third-degree price discrimination. Antitrust laws. Ah, yes. Price discrimination. A fascinating concept, isn't it? We've discussed its various forms, first, second, and third degree, each a unique dance between producer and consumer, a negotiation of value that ripples through the market. But like any intricate dance, there are boundaries. Rules, but regulations. And tonight, our focus turns to the legal dimensions, specifically the legality of third-degree price discrimination under the purview of antitrust laws. Recall that third-degree price discrimination, often the most readily observed in our everyday lives, involves segmenting the market into distinct groups and charging different prices to each, based on their differing price elasticities of demand. Think of student discounts, senior citizen rates, or geographically diverse pricing strategies. The logic is simple. Extract more surplus from those willing to pay more, while still serving those more sensitive to price changes. The question, however, is whether such practices are permissible within the framework of competition law. To answer this, we must first understand the core objective of antitrust legislation. Its essence is the preservation of competition. Antitrust laws, like carefully calibrated instruments, are designed to prevent firms from engaging in practices that unduly restrain trade, monopolize markets, or otherwise harm consumers. They seek to maintain a level playing field, ensuring that innovation flourishes and that consumers benefit from competitive pricing and diverse product offerings. The legality of third-degree price discrimination is not a simple yes or no proposition. It depends. It hinges on a delicate balancing act. The policymaker must weigh the potential benefits of price discrimination against its potential harms. On one hand, it can increase overall output. By serving previously unserved market segments, a firm engaging in third-degree price discrimination may produce and sell more goods and services than it otherwise would. This can lead to lower average costs and potentially benefits for some consumers. Consider a pharmaceutical company that sells a life-saving drug at a significantly lower price in developing countries. This practice, a form of third-degree price discrimination, allows the company to recoup some of its research and development costs, while simultaneously providing access to medication in regions where it would otherwise be unaffordable. In such cases, the societal benefits may outweigh any potential anti-competitive concerns. On the other hand, third-degree price discrimination can also be used to stifle competition. If a dominant firm uses its market power to charge predatory prices in certain segments, it may drive out smaller competitors, ultimately harming consumers in the long run. Imagine a large airline selectively lowering prices on routes served by smaller regional carriers, with the intent of forcing them out of business. Once the competition is eliminated, the dominant airline can then raise prices, exploiting its newfound monopoly power. The key factor in determining the legality often rests on the concept of market power. Does the firm engaging in price discrimination possess substantial market power? Can it significantly influence prices and output? If the answer is yes, then the practice is more likely to attract scrutiny from antitrust authorities. Conversely, if the firm is a relatively small player in a competitive market, its pricing strategies are less likely to raise concerns. Further complicating the issue is the concept of injury to competition versus injury to competitors. Antitrust laws are primarily concerned with protecting competition as a whole, not necessarily individual competitors. A firm is not necessarily violating the law simply because its pricing strategies harm a rival. The crucial question is whether the practice harms the overall competitive process. Does it lead to higher prices, reduced innovation, or a less diverse range of products and services for consumers? Therefore, the policymaker typically employs a rule of reason analysis. This involves a comprehensive assessment of the facts and circumstances, weighing the pro-competitive benefits of the practice against its potential anti-competitive harms. Factors such as market structure, the firm's market share, the barriers to entry, and the likely effects on prices, output, and innovation are all carefully considered. In essence, the legality of third-degree price discrimination is a complex and fact-specific determination. It's a continuous evaluation of whether the dance between producer and consumer is a harmonious waltz that benefits society or a clumsy stomp that crushes competition. The classical economist might argue that any form of price discrimination, even third degree, ultimately leads to greater efficiency. By allowing firms to better align prices with consumer preferences, it encourages them to produce more and serve a wider range of customers. But the policymaker must consider the real-world implications, the potential for abuse, and the need to protect the integrity of the competitive process. Chapter 31. The Role of Technology in Enabling Price Discrimination. Big Data and AI. Introduction. Good evening. As we settle into the deeper currents of economic thought, we turn our attention tonight to a force that has reshaped nearly every aspect of the market landscape: technology. We've established the fundamental principles of price discrimination. But now let's explore how digital innovation, specifically big data and artificial intelligence. In practice, firms possessing even a modicum of market power are driven to extract greater surplus. Price discrimination becomes a tool, sometimes a blunt instrument, sometimes a surgeon's scalpel, to achieve that extraction. First-degree price discrimination and AI. Let's begin with first-degree price discrimination, also known as perfect price discrimination. In its purest form, this involves charging each customer the absolute maximum they are willing to pay. Historically, this was largely theoretical, a benchmark rather than a practical strategy. The sheer informational demands were insurmountable. However, big data and AI are eroding these limitations. Consider the vast datasets generated by online browsing, purchase histories, and social media activity. AI algorithms can analyze this data to construct remarkably accurate profiles of individual consumer preferences and price sensitivities. Personalized pricing, once a distant dream, is becoming increasingly feasible. Think of dynamic pricing algorithms employed by online retailers. They are, in essence, attempting to approximate first-degree discrimination, albeit with varying degrees of success. It's a balancing act. Pushing too hard risks alienating customers, but too little leaves profit untapped. Second-degree price discrimination and machine learning. Next, we turn to second-degree price discrimination, which relies on offering different product versions or packages designed to self-select consumers based on their willingness to pay. This often manifests as quantity discounts, premium features, or tiered services. Technology enhances this strategy in two key ways. First, machine learning algorithms can optimize the design of these product versions, identifying the optimal combination of features and prices to maximize revenue. Second, data analytics can track consumer choices across these versions, providing valuable feedback for refining the offerings. Imagine a streaming service offering different subscription tiers with varying resolutions, device limits, and ad-free options. The service provider uses data on user choices to dynamically adjust the features and pricing of each tier, ensuring that it continues to attract a diverse customer base. Third-degree price discrimination and targeted advertising. Finally, we consider third-degree price discrimination, where the market is segmented into groups with differing price elasticities of demand. This is perhaps the most prevalent form of price discrimination. Traditionally, market segmentation was based on observable characteristics like age, location, or student status. However, technology allows for far more granular segmentation using behavioral data. Targeted advertising, powered by AI, is a prime example. Algorithms can identify consumers with a high propensity to purchase a particular product or service and present them with ads that reflect their individual preferences and price sensitivities. Furthermore, technology allows firms to create digital fences that prevent arbitrage between segments. For example, a geographically targeted promotion on a mobile app can only be accessed by consumers within a specific area, effectively preventing them from reselling the product to consumers in other areas. Ethical considerations and policy responses. Of course, the increased sophistication of price discrimination, enabled by technology, raises significant ethical concern. Critics argue that it can exploit vulnerable consumers, exacerbate inequality, and erode trust in the marketplace. The policymaker faces a delicate balancing act, encouraging innovation while protecting consumers from unfair practices. One approach is to focus on transparency, requiring firms to disclose their pricing algorithms and data collection practices. Another is to strengthen anti-discrimination laws to prevent firms from using sensitive personal data to unfairly target specific groups. The effectiveness of these measures remains a subject of ongoing debate. The core question revolves around whether technological advancements should be treated as a boon to all or a selective reward granted by insight into demand. Intellectual drift. Think of the market as a complex ecosystem. Price discrimination is a strategy that shapes the flow of resources within that ecosystem. Technology has amplified the power of this strategy, creating both opportunities and challenges. The balance between innovation and fairness is constantly shifting, requiring careful navigation by both firms and policymakers. Open loop. As we conclude this exploration of technology's role in price discrimination, we are left to ponder. What new economic forms might emerge as artificial intelligence becomes more deeply integrated into the fabric of our market systems? What unseen markets are yet to be revealed by these tools? That is a question for another night, and perhaps for future study. Chapter 32. Dynamic Pricing. Algorithmic adjustments in real time. Having considered the static landscape of market equilibrium, we now turn our gaze towards a more fluid, responsive system, dynamic pricing. At its heart lies the age-old practice of price discrimination, albeit amplified by the speed and precision of modern algorithms. Consider it a river, once confined to predictable meanders, now channeled through a complex network of sensors and gates, its flow constantly adjusted to maximize its potential energy. Price discrimination, in its essence, is the act of charging different prices to different consumers for the same good or service. It's a deviation from the idealized world of perfect competition, where a single price reigns supreme. But in the real world, market imperfections allow for a far more nuanced, and sometimes controversial, interplay of supply and demand. We can categorize these approaches into three primary degrees, each representing a progressively sophisticated manipulation of price. The first degree, often termed perfect price discrimination, is a theoretical ideal, a kind of economic nirvana for the seller, and, perhaps, purgatory for the buyer. Here, the seller knows the maximum willingness to pay for each individual consumer and charges them exactly that amount. Imagine an artist crafting a bespoke sculpture for a client, negotiating a price that perfectly captures the perceived value. Or perhaps a shrewd antique dealer, extracting the absolute top dollar from a passionate collector. In this scenario, all consumer surplus, the benefit a consumer receives when paying less than they were willing to, is captured by the seller. It is a complete extraction of value, leaving the consumer with only the bare minimum satisfaction needed to justify the purchase. This degree is rarely observed in its pure form, as it requires an impossibly comprehensive understanding of each consumer's preferences. Think of it as balancing a feather on your fingertip. Theoretically possible, but perpetually on the verge of toppling. Second-degree price discrimination involves offering different price structures to different groups of consumers, allowing them to self-select into the pricing tier that best suits their needs. This is often achieved through quantity discounts, tiered subscriptions, or bundled products. Think of a cellular service provider offering various data plans. Those who consume vast amounts of data opt for the premium plan, while those with lighter usage choose the basic option. The company doesn't explicitly target individuals based on their willingness to pay, but rather designs options that cater to different usage patterns, effectively segmenting the market. This approach, like a carefully designed ecosystem, allows the firm to cater to a diverse consumer base, capturing more value than would be possible with a uniform price. It is a matter of sculpting a landscape that passively channels behavior, rather than directly dictating it. Third-degree price discrimination, perhaps the most prevalent in practice, involves dividing the market into distinct segments based on identifiable characteristics, and charging different prices in each segment. What then? Student discounts, senior citizen rates, and geographic pricing all fall into this category. Airlines, for example, often charge different prices for the same flight depending on the booking channel or the time of purchase. The key here is that the seller must be able to prevent arbitrage, the buying of goods in the cheaper market, and reselling them in the more expensive market. Imagine a dam separating two bodies of water at different levels. If the dam fails, the water levels equalize, negating the price difference. This degree of price discrimination is a careful balancing act, requiring constant vigilance to prevent market leakage. Today, algorithms are rapidly transforming these traditional forms of price discrimination. Big data and machine learning allow businesses to analyze vast datasets, predict individual willingness to pay with increasing accuracy, and dynamically adjust prices in real time. This is the river now, augmented by complex algorithms. Surges of high-priced offers when demand peaks, sudden dips when competition intensifies. The consequences of this shift are profound, raising complex ethical and economic questions. Is this a more efficient allocation of resources or an exploitation of consumer vulnerabilities? The answer, as with most complex systems, is likely a nuanced blend of both. The policymaker wrestles with these implications, carefully considering the incentives and disincentives the system creates, attempting to steer its course towards a more equitable distribution of resources. As we contemplate the potential of algorithmic pricing to reshape market dynamics, we might wonder, will the relentless pursuit of profit maximization ultimately lead to a more fragmented and inequitable economic landscape? Or will it unlock new efficiencies that benefit both businesses and consumers? And further, how can we anticipate the secondary and tertiary effects of these complex algorithms on the broader socio-economic fabric? These remain open questions, awaiting further exploration in the chapters ahead. Chapter 33. Personalized recommendations and targeted advertising. We've explored the broad contours of market dynamics, the dance between supply and demand. Now, let us delve into the more nuanced art of pricing, specifically, the intriguing world of price discrimination. This isn't simply about charging different prices. It's about extracting consumer surplus, that latent willingness to pay that lies hidden within each of us. Consider it as a carefully calibrated titration, measuring each individual's desire and adjusting the price accordingly. Price discrimination, in its essence, seeks to transform consumer surplus into producer surplus. It recognizes that not everyone values a product or service equally. Some are willing to pay a premium for convenience, exclusivity, or simply a stronger desire. Our journey begins with understanding the three primary degrees of this economic phenomena. First-degree price discrimination, sometimes called perfect price discrimination, is the holy grail, the theoretical ideal. Imagine a seller who knows exactly what each individual customer is willing to pay and charges precisely that amount. The classical economist, observing this scenario, would marvel at the complete capture of consumer surplus. The seller leaves nothing on the table, extracting every last drop of value. Think of a bespoke tailor, meticulously crafting a suit and pricing it based on the client's revealed preferences, taking into account their perceived value of the garment, their budget, and even their personality. Of course, in the real world, achieving perfect information and preventing arbitrage, the reselling of goods from those charged lower prices to those charged higher, proves almost impossible. The flow of information, like water seeking its level, tends to equalize prices, making this a mostly theoretical exercise. Second-degree price discrimination involves charging different prices based on the quantity consumed. This is far more common and readily observable. The most familiar example is bulk discounts. A supermarket, for instance, might offer a lower price per unit for purchasing multiple items. This caters to different segments of consumers, those with large families or a high consumption rate, versus those who only need a small amount. Similarly, tiered pricing for electricity or water consumption falls into this category. The early units are priced lower, recognizing the essential nature of basic consumption. As consumption increases, the price per unit rises, reflecting the diminishing marginal utility, the decreasing satisfaction derived from each additional unit. This allows the seller to capture a larger portion of consumer surplus by segmenting the market based on usage patterns. The policymaker might view this with a cautious eye, ensuring that such schemes don't unfairly disadvantage lower-income households or smaller consumers. Third-degree price discrimination is perhaps the most prevalent form, involving dividing consumers into distinct groups and charging different prices to each group. These groups are typically segmented based on observable characteristics such as age, location, or student status. Consider a movie theater offering discounted tickets to students or senior citizens, or an airline charging different prices for the same seat depending on the time of purchase, the booking class, or the passenger's perceived willingness to pay. The key here is identifying and segregating the market. Airlines, for instance, cleverly use dynamic pricing algorithms that constantly adjust fares based on demand, time of day, and even the user's browsing history. The crucial condition for this strategy to succeed is that the elasticity of demand must differ between the groups. Those with a more elastic demand will be charged lower prices to stimulate sales, while those with a less elastic demand will be charged higher prices. This practice thrives in markets where arbitrage is difficult or impossible. You can't readily transfer a student discount ticket to a non-student, for instance. The system relies on a barrier, a constraint, that prevents the leakage of pricing benefits across segments. Personalized recommendations and targeted advertising are increasingly powerful tools enabling sophisticated forms of price discrimination. By analyzing vast amounts of data, companies can gain insights into individual consumer preferences and predict their willingness to pay with greater accuracy. This blurs the lines between the 3 degrees, moving towards a more individualized pricing strategy, a digital approximation of first-degree discrimination. However, the ethical implications are significant, raising concerns about fairness, transparency, and the potential for exploitation. As technology advances, the ability to precisely target and price discriminate will only increase. The next question becomes, how do we balance the pursuit of economic efficiency with the principles of equity and consumer protection in this increasingly personalized marketplace? What new equilibriums must be forged? Chapter 34. The implications of price discrimination for e-commerce. Last time, we explored the shifting sands of market power in the digital realm. We touched upon the ways e-commerce platforms, by their very nature, can accumulate influence. Tonight, we delve into a related, yet subtly distinct, phenomenon: price discrimination. It's a practice woven into the fabric of online commerce, a delicate dance between maximizing profit and understanding consumer behavior. We'll examine its various forms, dissecting their implications for the digital marketplace in ways designed to illuminate rather than agitate the mind. Price discrimination, at its heart, is the act of selling the same product or service at different prices to different customers. It seems, on the surface, inherently unfair. But as we shall see, the economic rationale is often more nuanced, resting on differing willingnesses to pay and the seller's ability to segment the market. We can categorize these methods into 3 primary types, each a variation on a common theme. First, let us consider first-degree price discrimination, often described as perfect price discrimination. Imagine a scenario, a purely theoretical one in most cases, where the seller knows exactly how much each individual customer is willing to pay. The seller then charges each customer that precise amount, extracting every ounce of consumer surplus. Think of a bespoke service, tailored so perfectly to the individual, that the price is calibrated with utmost precision. In this ideal, almost utopian scenario, there is no deadweight loss. All potential gains from trade are realized, though they accrue entirely to the seller. Online auctions, if perfectly executed, and if the auctioneer truly understood each bidder's limit, might represent a near approximation, though imperfections always exist. Now, let's move on to second-degree price discrimination. This occurs when the seller charges different prices based on the quantity consumed. This is far more common in e-commerce. Think of tiered subscription services, the basic package for casual users, a premium package with enhanced features for power users, and perhaps an enterprise package for large organizations. The price per unit decreases as the quantity purchased increases. This allows the seller to capture a wider range of consumers, each with varying needs and budgets. Quantity discounts are the classic example, offering reduced prices for bulk purchases. The seller doesn't need to know each individual's willingness to pay. Rather, They offer choices that reveal consumer preferences through their selection of quantity. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination. This is perhaps the most prevalent form of price discrimination observed in the digital landscape. Here, the seller divides the market into distinct groups, each with its own demand curve. The policymaker, for instance, might regulate such practices with intense interest. Students, seniors, or geographically defined regions are common segments. E-commerce platforms often use data analytics to identify and target specific groups. For example, targeted advertising campaigns on social media might offer exclusive discounts to certain demographics. A traveler booking a flight may receive a different price based on their detected location or browsing history. The seller then charges different prices to these groups, maximizing profit in each segment. This relies on the seller's ability to prevent arbitrage, meaning preventing consumers in the low-price segment from reselling to those in the high-price segment. Think of geographic restrictions on digital content or student discounts that require verification. The rise of e-commerce has amplified the potential for price discrimination. The ability to collect and analyze vast amounts of data on consumer behavior provides unprecedented opportunities for segmenting the market and tailoring prices. This presents both opportunities and challenges. For the seller, it's a powerful tool for increasing revenue. For the consumer, it can lead to both lower prices and perceived unfairness. The classical economist might argue this results in a more efficient allocation of resources, at least from a profit perspective. The ethical and societal implications of price discrimination in e-commerce are complex and continue to be debated. The line between legitimate market segmentation and exploitative practices is often blurred. The question becomes, how do we navigate this evolving landscape, ensuring both innovation and fairness in the digital marketplace? What are the long-term consequences of personalized pricing algorithms that learn and adapt to our every digital move? Perhaps this is a theme we can visit next time, as we continue to map the intricate contours of the digital economy. Chapter 35. The impact of price discrimination on consumer trust and brand loyalty. Ah, yes. We were just contemplating the intricacies of market segmentation, weren't we? That inherent drive within firms to categorize, to understand, and ultimately to differentiate the appeal and the pricing of their offering. From there, we flow naturally into the somewhat turbulent, yet undeniably fascinating, waters of price discrimination. Tonight, we shall examine how the practice of charging different prices to different consumers for the same good or service ripples outwards, impacting consumer trust and the fragile bloom of brand loyalty. Price discrimination, at its heart, is about capturing as much consumer surplus as possible. But the seemingly straightforward objective manifests in subtly different ways, each carrying its own unique set of ethical and practical considerations. We can broadly categorize these mechanisms into 3 degrees, each representing a progressively more sophisticated and potentially more contentious approach. Let us begin with first-degree price discrimination, sometimes referred to as perfect price discrimination. Imagine, if you will, a scenario where the firm possesses perfect knowledge of each individual consumer's willingness to pay. In this idealized model, the firm extracts the maximum possible price from each customer, leaving them with virtually no consumer surplus. Think of a bespoke tailor who, through skillful questioning and observation, discerns the absolute highest price a client would be willing to pay for a custom suit, and then charges exactly that amount. While theoretically compelling, true first-degree price discrimination is exceedingly rare in practice. The informational requirements are simply too demanding. It demands a level of individual insight that is rarely attainable in any market of considerable size. The challenge of actually understanding true individual valuation of each consumer is too high. Yet, it serves as an important theoretical benchmark, representing the ultimate goal of surplus extraction for many firms. Moving now to second-degree price discrimination, we encounter a slightly more grounded reality. Here, the firm doesn't possess perfect individual information, but it does offer different pricing schedules or packages based on consumption. Quantity discounts are perhaps the most common example. The more you buy, the lower the price per unit. Think of a bulk retailer offering significantly lower prices per roll of paper towels when you purchase a case, rather than a single roll. Or consider tiered pricing for utilities, where the price per kilowatt-hour decreases as your consumption increases beyond certain thresholds. The key difference from the first degree is that consumers self-select into different price points based on their consumption patterns. The firm offers the choices. The consumer makes the decision. This method is more achievable, but also potentially more easily gamed by some consumers. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination. This is perhaps the most prevalent and readily observable form. Here, the market is segmented into distinct groups, each with different demand elasticities. The firm charges different prices to each group. Student discounts, senior citizen discounts, and geographical pricing are all examples of third-degree price discrimination. Airlines charging different fares based on booking time or day of travel is another classic example. The fundamental principle at play is that groups with more inelastic demand will be charged higher prices, while groups with more elastic demand will receive lower prices. This requires the ability to identify and separate these groups and prevent arbitrage. The ability to define and isolate markets is crucial for effectiveness. A crucial part of this is the no arbitrage rule, which is that it must not be economical for a third party to buy low in the low-cost market and sell high in the high-cost market. Now, consider the impact of all this on consumer trust and brand loyalty. The perception of fairness is paramount. Consumers are generally accepting of price variations that are perceived as reflecting genuine cost differences, such as transportation costs and geographical pricing. However, if price discrimination is perceived as arbitrary, unfair, or exploitative, it can erode trust and damage brand reputation. Imagine discovering that a neighbor paid significantly less for the same product simply because they belong to a different demographic group. This could easily lead to resentment and a loss of loyalty. Transparency is key. Firms that are open and honest about their pricing practices are more likely to maintain consumer trust, even if those practices involve price discrimination. The question then becomes, how much transparency is too much? How do you balance the need to justify pricing decisions with the desire to maintain competitive advantage? In the next stage of our journey, we must delve into the regulatory landscape. How do governments attempt to regulate price discrimination, balancing the potential benefits of increased output and consumer access with the risks of unfairness and exploitation? It is a complex balancing act, isn't it? The future of price discrimination. Emerging trends and technologies. Yes. We've spent some time now understanding the foundations of price discrimination, the art, if you will, of charging different prices to different customers for the same good or service. Now, let us gently shift our focus, like the shifting of sands, to the future. What emerging trends and technologies are poised to reshape this enduring economic practice? And how might the familiar mechanisms of first, second, and third-degree price discrimination evolve within this new landscape? Recall our earlier discussions. First-degree price discrimination, the ideal from the perspective of the firm, involves charging each customer their maximum willingness to pay. It's a perfectly tailored price, like a bespoke suit. In the past, this was largely theoretical, achievable only in very specific, limited contexts. Perhaps a skilled artisan crafting a unique item for a discerning patron. But technological advancements are subtly eroding those limitations. Consider the rise of advanced data analytics. Algorithms, tirelessly sifting through vast quantities of consumer data, purchase histories, browsing habits, social media activity, are painting increasingly detailed portraits of individual preferences and price sensitivities. The classical economist, a staunch believer in market efficiency, might argue that this heightened level of information will naturally lead to greater first-degree price discrimination. Imagine personalized pricing engines, adjusting in real time based on a customer's perceived valuation. This isn't quite the pervasive, all-seeing eye, but rather a collection of sophisticated lenses, each offering a clearer view of individual demand. However, there's a countercurrent at play. Concerns about privacy and data security are mounting. The policymaker, ever mindful of consumer welfare, is grappling with the ethical and legal implications of such personalized pricing. Regulations are being considered, designed to protect consumers from potentially exploitative practices. The future of first-degree price discrimination may therefore hinge on finding a delicate balance between the firm's desire to maximize profit and the consumer's right to privacy. Now, let's turn our attention to second-degree price discrimination, often manifested through quantity discounts or tiered pricing. Think of it as self-selection. Customers choose the pricing plan that best suits their needs, indirectly revealing their willingness to pay. This has traditionally been implemented through menu pricing, where firms offer different bundles of goods or services at varying prices. The evolution here is less about a fundamental shift and more about a refinement of existing techniques. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are enabling firms to design more sophisticated and nuanced menu pricing strategies. Instead of simply offering a basic, premium, and deluxe package, companies can now create a much wider array of options, each carefully calibrated to appeal to specific customer segments. The algorithm becomes a tireless experimenter, constantly tweaking prices and bundles to optimize revenue. Think of streaming services that personalize content recommendations. This principle can be extended to personalized pricing packages, subtly guiding consumers towards the most profitable choice for the firm, while still providing value to the consumer. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, segmenting markets and charging different prices based on group characteristics. This is the most common form, often seen in student discounts or geographically differentiated pricing. The technological advancements impacting this form are perhaps the most disruptive. Geographic boundaries, once a reliable basis for market segmentation, are becoming increasingly porous in the digital age. A consumer in one country can easily access goods and services offered in another, blurring the lines between markets. The rise of global e-commerce and cross-border data flows is creating a more interconnected and potentially more competitive landscape. Firms must now contend with arbitrage opportunities, where savvy consumers exploit price differentials across markets. The challenge lies in identifying and managing these arbitrage opportunities, while still maintaining the ability to price discriminate effectively. Location-based services and dynamic pricing algorithms are becoming essential tools in this ongoing balancing act. The firm must become as nimble as the market itself. In conclusion, the future of price discrimination is a dynamic and complex interplay of technological advancements, regulatory constraints, and evolving consumer behavior. The traditional mechanisms, first, second, and third degree, are being reshaped by the forces of data, artificial intelligence, and globalization. It is a constant adaptation, a dance between supplier and consumer, regulation and innovation. As we move forward, one lingering question remains. Will the pursuit of perfect price discrimination ultimately lead to greater market efficiency, or will it exacerbate existing inequality? A question for another evening, perhaps. A question to ponder as we drift off to sleep. Chapter 37. Behavioral Economics and Price Discrimination. Nudging and Framing. Yes, price. A fundamental cornerstone of economic exchange. We've spoken of its role in equilibrium, signaling scarcity, and guiding resource allocation. But what happens when the concept of a singular, unwavering price begins to blur? When the seller, like a skilled artist with a palette, finds ways to offer the same good or service at different prices to different customers? This, my friends, is the realm of price discrimination. Think back to our exploration of market structures. We examined perfect competition, monopolies, and the nuanced landscapes in between. Now, consider a firm possessing some degree of market power, the ability to influence the price, however subtly. With this power comes the potential, and often the temptation, to segment the market and extract additional value. Price discrimination isn't inherently malevolent. It's a strategy, a tool. Its ethical implications depend entirely on its application and consequences. We'll explore the three primary mechanisms of price discrimination, each a different shade on the spectrum of economic strategy. Let us begin with the most idealistic, from the perspective of the seller, of course. First-degree price discrimination, sometimes called perfect price discrimination, is a theoretical construct more often approached than fully achieved. Imagine a merchant who possesses complete knowledge of each customer's willingness to pay. This merchant, with their almost clairvoyant ability, charges each individual the absolute maximum price they are willing to bear. The classical economist might see this as an efficient outcome. In a perverse way, the product goes to everyone who values it at least as much as it costs to produce it. No consumer surplus remains, it's all captured by the seller. Think of haggling in a market where the seller perfectly gauges your desire for a particular item, or perhaps a customized software package tailored to a specific client's budget. Now, let us descend from the ethereal heights of perfect knowledge to a more grounded reality. Second-degree price discrimination involves charging different prices based on the quantity consumed. This is often implemented through tiered pricing structures. Utility companies, for instance, often employ this method. The first block of kilowatt-hours might be priced higher, recognizing the essential nature of basic electricity consumption. Subsequent blocks, representing discretionary usage, may be offered at a lower rate. Similarly, bulk discounts are a form of second-degree discrimination. The more you buy, the lower the price per unit, reflecting perhaps economies of scale in distribution, or simply the seller's desire to clear inventory. This allows the seller to capture consumer surplus from those who value the good highly in larger quantities. Our final stop on this journey through price discrimination mechanisms is third-degree price discrimination. This involves dividing the market into distinct segments, each with different price elasticities of demand, and charging different prices to each segment. A classic example is student or senior citizen discounts. These groups typically have a higher price elasticity. They are more sensitive to price changes. By offering lower prices to these segments, the seller can attract additional customers who would not have purchased at the regular price. Another example is geographical price variations, where the same product is sold at different prices in different regions, reflecting varying local demand and competitive conditions. The policymaker often scrutinizes these practices, ensuring they don't unfairly disadvantage specific groups or stifle competition. So, we've traversed the spectrum of price discrimination, from the theoretical perfection of individualized pricing to the practical realities of tiered structures and market segmentation. Each mechanism, driven by the seller's quest to maximize profit, interacts with the consumer's behavior in subtle and complex ways. The question, then, that lingers in the air as the clock ticks softly towards dawn is this: how does our understanding of these mechanisms shape our expectations about market efficiency and fairness? And further, how do the insights of behavioral economics, with its focus on cognitive biases and framing effects, influence the efficacy of these pricing strategies? That, perhaps, is a tale for another evening. Chapter 38. The Ethics of Dynamic Pricing, Fairness and Transparency. Tonight, let's consider the subtle art of price discrimination. It's a practice as old as commerce itself, yet one that, with the rise of sophisticated algorithms and vast troves of consumer data, demands renewed ethical scrutiny. The question isn't simply can we charge different prices to different people, but should we? And if so, under what conditions? Price discrimination, at its core, is the practice of selling the same product or service at different prices to different consumers. The underlying rationale is beautifully simple: to extract more consumer surplus, that area of benefit consumers receive when they buy something for less than the maximum they're willing to pay. Imagine a gently sloping demand curve. A firm that sells everything at one fixed price leaves a considerable portion of potential revenue untapped. Price discrimination seeks to capture some of that untapped potential. Economists have elegantly categorized price discrimination into three primary degrees, each representing a different level of precision and, arguably, a different level of ethical complexity. Think of them as streams, branching off from a common source, each following its own path downstream. First-degree price discrimination, sometimes called perfect price discrimination, is the theoretical ideal, though rarely, if ever, perfectly realized in practice. Imagine a lone artisan crafting a unique object. They know each potential buyer intimately, understand their individual willingness to pay, and charge accordingly. The classical economist might marvel at the efficiency of such a system. The artisan captures all of the consumer surplus, leaving the buyer with almost nothing. The ethical concerns here are immediate. Is it fair to extract every last penny of value from each customer? Such complete information is rarely available, but personalized pricing algorithms attempt to approximate this ideal. The question arises, does ever-increasing accuracy erode the ethical baseline? Second-degree price discrimination takes a slightly different form. Here, the seller doesn't know each individual's willingness to pay, but instead offers different price packages based on quantity or consumption. Think of bulk discounts, tiered pricing for internet service, or even happy hour specials. The policymaker might see this as less objectionable, as consumers self-select into different price tiers based on their needs and preferences. Those who value the product highly and consume a lot pay more, while those who value it less and consume less pay less. The key ethical consideration lies in ensuring that these tiers are genuinely reflective of cost differences or differences in willingness to pay, rather than being designed to exploit certain consumer groups. Is there an equitable balance? Third-degree price discrimination is perhaps the most common and readily observable form. It involves dividing the market into segments, students, seniors, or geographic regions, for example, and charging different prices in each segment. The justification often rests on differing demand elasticities. Some groups are more price-sensitive than others. Airline tickets are a classic example, with business travelers often paying significantly more than leisure travelers. The ethical arbiter will ask, is this segmentation based on legitimate differences in cost or demand, or is it exploiting vulnerable groups? Charging higher prices in lower-income neighborhoods, for example, raises serious questions of fairness and accessibility. Consider the implications for social equity. Do these practices worsen existing disparities? The rise of dynamic pricing, driven by algorithms that constantly adjust prices in response to real-time demand and supply conditions, adds another layer of complexity. While dynamic pricing can improve efficiency and match supply with demand, it can also lead to perceptions of unfairness. A passenger seeing their airline ticket price increase suddenly just minutes before booking might feel manipulated, even if the algorithm is simply responding to increased demand. Transparency is key here. If consumers understand the factors driving price changes, they are more likely to accept them, even if they don't always like them. But what happens when algorithms become so complex that even the firms deploying them struggle to explain their rationale? Do we lose sight of accountability? Ultimately, the ethics of dynamic pricing and price discrimination rests on a delicate balance between economic efficiency and social fairness. There are no easy answers, and the appropriate approach will depend on the specific context and the values we prioritize as a society. We must continually ask ourselves, are these practices promoting innovation and efficiency, or are they exacerbating inequalities and eroding trust? Chapter 39. The role of regulation in the age of personalized pricing. Yes. We were discussing the increasing granularity of data and its impact on pricing strategies. As we move from the broad strokes of traditional markets to the intricate mosaics of personalized offerings, the specter of price discrimination looms ever larger. Tonight, let's gently explore the regulatory landscape that attempts to navigate this complex terrain, a landscape built upon the foundational understanding of first, second, and third-degree price discrimination. Allow your mind to settle, like sediment in a still pond. Let's begin with the most aspirational form. First-degree price discrimination. Imagine, if you will, a perfectly efficient marketplace. In this idealized scenario, the seller possesses complete knowledge of each individual consumer's willingness to pay. They can, therefore, extract the absolute maximum value from each transaction, charging each person precisely what they are willing to bear. This is, in essence, taking the entire consumer surplus, the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what they actually pay, and converting it into producer surplus, the profit for the seller. The classical economist often viewed this as a theoretical limit, a benchmark against which real-world pricing strategies could be measured. In practice, achieving perfect first-degree price discrimination is nearly impossible. The information asymmetry is too great. Individuals are adept at concealing their true preferences. The challenge for businesses, then, becomes developing strategies that approximate this ideal, drawing ever closer to that elusive edge. Next, we descend to the more practical realm of second-degree price discrimination. Here, the seller acknowledges that they do not possess perfect information about individual consumers. Instead, they offer a menu of options designed to self-select different customer segments. Think of tiered pricing for subscriptions, basic, premium, and enterprise levels, each appealing to a different level of need and, crucially, a different willingness to pay. This is a far more subtle dance. The seller crafts the offerings, and the consumers, by their choices, reveal their underlying valuations. The subtle art here lies in designing the options in such a way that consumers accurately sort themselves. If the premium option is only marginally better than the basic, some high-value customers might settle for the lower tier, reducing the seller's potential profit. Second-degree discrimination requires a delicate balancing act, a keen understanding of customer psychology, and a continuous process of experimentation and refinement. The flow of customers needs to be channeled deliberately. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, perhaps the most commonly encountered form. This involves dividing the market into distinct segments, students, seniors, or geographic regions, and charging different prices to each segment. The crucial factor is that the segments must be relatively isolated. Arbitrage, the practice of buying low in one market and selling high in another, must be limited. Consider, for example, student discounts on software or regional variations in airline ticket prices. These are clear examples of third-degree discrimination, predicated on the assumption that each segment has a different price elasticity of demand, that is, a different sensitivity to price changes. The policymaker often finds themselves wrestling with the ethical and societal implications of these practices. Is it inherently unfair to charge different prices to different people? The answer, of course, is rarely straightforward. In some cases, price discrimination can increase overall welfare by extending access to goods and services to those who would otherwise be priced out of the market. Student discounts, for instance, can enable more people to pursue higher education. However, it can also lead to exploitation, particularly if it targets vulnerable populations or creates unfair advantages for certain groups. The challenge for regulators, therefore, lies in striking a balance to foster innovation and efficiency while protecting consumers from predatory pricing practices. They must navigate the intricate web of market dynamics, weighing the potential benefits against the potential harms. Antitrust laws, consumer protection regulations, and industry-specific guidelines all play a role in shaping the regulatory landscape. As we move further into the age of personalized pricing, driven by ever more sophisticated algorithms and granular data, the questions surrounding regulation only become more pressing. Can existing frameworks adequately address the challenges posed by hyper-personalized pricing? Will new regulations be needed to ensure fairness and transparency in this rapidly evolving landscape? What role will artificial intelligence play, both in facilitating personalized pricing and in monitoring its impact? These are profound questions that will shape the future of commerce and the relationship between businesses and consumers. As we drift towards slumber, let us ponder. What new economic form will be birthed from this data-driven age? Chapter 40. Consumer Strategies for Avoiding Price Discrimination. Last time, we explored the motivations behind price discrimination, the intricate dance firms engage in to extract maximum value from diverse consumer segments. Tonight, let us shift perspective. Let's consider the consumer, the individual navigating this landscape of varied prices. How can we, as informed actors in the market, mitigate the effects of price discrimination and secure the best possible deals? First, a brief recap of our foundational understanding. We spoke of the 3 degrees of price discrimination, each a distinct strategy employed by firms. First degree, or perfect price discrimination, is the theoretical ideal for the firm, where each consumer pays their absolute maximum willingness to pay. Think of a bespoke artisan, tailoring a unique product and negotiating a price directly with each client. This, fortunately, is rare in most markets, due to the difficulty of gathering such precise information. Second-degree price discrimination involves offering different pricing structures based on consumption level. Quantity discounts, for example, are a common manifestation. The more you buy, the lower the per unit price. This incentivizes larger purchases and allows the firm to cater to different demand elasticities. Finally, third-degree price discrimination divides consumers into distinct groups, each facing a different price. Student discounts, senior citizen rates, or geographically based pricing are prime examples. The firm identifies segments with varying price sensitivities and adjusts accordingly. So, how do we, the consumers, push back against this structured pricing? The answer lies in a multi-pronged approach, a combination of strategic behavior and awareness. One powerful tool is information gathering. Knowledge, as they say, is power. Thoroughly research prices across different vendors, locations, and even time periods. The internet has democratized this process considerably. Price comparison websites, user reviews, and online forums can reveal discrepancies and hidden deals. The discerning consumer, armed with data, can exploit these variations to their advantage. Think of it as an economic arbitrage, identifying imbalances and correcting them, however modestly. Another tactic involves altering your consumption patterns. If a firm employs second-degree price discrimination, consider adjusting your purchasing habits. Are you buying just enough to avoid the next pricing tier? Perhaps increasing your purchase slightly to qualify for a substantial discount could be economically beneficial. Conversely, if you are consistently exceeding a certain threshold, might it be possible to reduce your consumption without significantly impacting your utility? This requires a careful assessment of your needs and a willingness to adapt. For third-degree price discrimination, exploiting arbitrage opportunities can be effective, although potentially ethically questionable in some contexts. If a product is significantly cheaper in one location or demographic group, explore whether it is possible to purchase it there and resell it elsewhere. However, be mindful of any legal or contractual restrictions that might prohibit such activities. Airlines, for example, often restrict the transferability of tickets, preventing arbitrage across different markets. More subtly, strategically revealing your identity can be advantageous. If you are eligible for a discount based on age or affiliation, obviously claim it. However, in other situations, it may be beneficial to mask your identity. For instance, using a VPN to browse online stores can sometimes reveal lower prices in different regions. Or, if you suspect a firm is tracking your browsing history and adjusting prices accordingly, clearing your cookies and using a private browsing mode may help to reset the algorithm's perception of your willingness to pay. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, support businesses that prioritize transparent and equitable pricing. Vote with your wallet. Patronize companies that avoid complex price discrimination schemes and offer fair prices to all customers. This sends a clear signal to the market, encouraging other firms to adopt more consumer-friendly practices. The classical economist reminds us that market forces, driven by informed consumer choices, can ultimately shape the behavior of firms. These strategies are not foolproof, of course. Firms are constantly evolving their pricing tactics, seeking new ways to extract value. The policymaker grapples with these complexities. But, by being informed, adaptable, and strategic, consumers can navigate the landscape of price discrimination more effectively and secure better deals for themselves. Our discussion tonight highlights the constant tension, the dynamic equilibrium between firms seeking profit maximization and consumers seeking value. But it also points to an even deeper question. What are the ethical boundaries of price discrimination? When does strategic pricing become exploitative? This, perhaps, is a question for another evening, as we continue our journey through the intricate world of economics. Good night. Chapter 41. The Impact of Price Discrimination on Income Inequality. Good evening. Last time we considered the broad strokes of market power and its implications for social welfare. Tonight, we delve into a specific manifestation of that power: price discrimination. And crucially, we'll examine its subtle, often overlooked, impact on the distribution of income. Price discrimination, at its core, is the practice of selling the same good or service at different prices to different customers. Not because of differences in production cost, mind you, but based on differences in their willingness to pay. It's a fascinating dance of supply, demand, and strategic manipulation. Now, price discrimination isn't a monolithic entity. It presents itself in distinct forms, each with its own characteristics and consequences. We can categorize these forms into three broad degrees, each representing a different level of sophistication in extracting consumer surplus. Let's begin with first-degree price discrimination. This is, in theory, the most complete form, and perhaps the most ambitious. Imagine a firm, a singular entity, possessing perfect knowledge of each individual customer's maximum willingness to pay. With this omniscience, they could charge each customer exactly that price, effectively capturing all consumer surplus. Think of a bespoke tailor, crafting a suit and charging each client the absolute maximum they are prepared to spend. In practice, this is exceedingly rare. The informational requirements are simply too daunting. How does one truly know what lies in the depths of another's pocket, or the heights of their desire? It exists primarily as a theoretical benchmark, a limit towards which firms might strive, but rarely achieve. The implications for income inequality under perfect price discrimination are complex. In essence, it shifts wealth from consumers across the board towards the producer. While it doesn't necessarily exacerbate inequality between consumers themselves, it dramatically concentrates wealth in the hands of the firm's owners and potentially its upper management. The pie of economic welfare is dramatically reshaped. Next, we have second-degree price discrimination. Here, the firm doesn't know each individual's willingness to pay, but they do understand that different groups of consumers have different demand curves. So, instead of targeting individuals, they design pricing schemes that allow consumers to self-select into different price categories. Quantity discounts are a classic example. The first unit might be priced higher, signaling scarcity or perceived value. Subsequent units are cheaper, appealing to those who value bulk consumption. Airlines also engage in this, offering different fare classes based on perceived value and willingness to pay for flexibility and comfort. Those willing to pay more for convenience and comfort effectively subsidize the lower fares offered to more price-sensitive travelers. The impact of second-degree price discrimination on income inequality is more nuanced. While it still transfers wealth from consumers to the firm, the effect is not uniformly distributed. Wealthier individuals, who are often less price-sensitive, may end up paying relatively more, while lower-income individuals benefit from the availability of lower-priced options, even if they are restricted in some way. However, this assumes equal access to these lower-priced options. If information barriers or logistical challenges prevent lower-income individuals from accessing these discounts, the inequality gap could widen. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination. This is arguably the most common form we encounter in our daily lives. Here, the firm divides its market into identifiable groups with distinct demand elasticities and charges different prices to each group. Student discounts, senior citizen discounts, geographically segmented pricing, all fall under this umbrella. The key is to prevent arbitrage, ensuring that consumers from the low-price market cannot easily resell to those in the high-price market. The consequences for income inequality here are the most ambiguous and context-dependent. If the market segmentation targets groups correlated with income, it could mitigate inequality, allowing lower-income individuals access to goods and services they might otherwise be priced out of. However, if the segmentation is based on factors unrelated to income, it may have little impact, or even exacerbate existing disparities if it disproportionately extracts surplus from lower-income individuals residing in those areas. So, as we've seen, price discrimination is not merely a quirk of the market. It is a powerful force with the potential to reshape the distribution of economic well-being. It's a complex balancing act, with potential benefits and drawbacks that depend heavily on the specific mechanisms employed and the characteristics of the market in question. And as always, there are winners and losers. But now, consider this. While we focused on the immediate effects of price discrimination on consumer surplus and income, what are the long-term consequences? How does the concentration of wealth in the hands of firms engaging in price discrimination impact innovation, investment, and the overall trajectory of economic development? That's a question for another evening, perhaps under the watchful gaze of a different constellation. Chapter 42. Price discrimination in developing countries. Opportunities and challenges. Last time, we considered the broad strokes of market efficiency and some inherent imperfections. Now, let's delve into a fascinating application, a nuanced strategy often employed and debated in developing economies: price discrimination. Picture it as a carefully balanced scale, where producers seek to maximize revenue while potentially expanding access to vital goods and services. Tonight, we'll explore the mechanics of this economic tool, examining its potential benefits and inherent pitfalls. At its heart, price discrimination involves charging different prices for the same good or service to different consumers. This isn't simply about sales or temporary discounts. It's about systematically tailoring prices based on perceived willingness to pay. And it manifests in three primary degrees, each with its own characteristics and implications. The first, and perhaps most theoretically intriguing, is first-degree price discrimination, sometimes referred to as perfect price discrimination. Imagine a scenario where a provider possesses complete knowledge of each customer's willingness to pay. The provider could then extract the maximum possible price from each individual, capturing the entire consumer surplus. Think of a skilled negotiator who, with perfect information, tailors the price precisely to each individual's breaking point. While virtually impossible to achieve in its purest form due to the inherent challenges of acquiring such granular information, it serves as an important theoretical benchmark. It highlights the potential gains from understanding individual consumer preferences and the ethical considerations that arise from exploiting that knowledge to its fullest extent. It's a theoretical extreme, like a perfectly frictionless surface in physics, useful for understanding underlying principles, even if unattainable in reality. Moving down a level of abstraction, we encounter second-degree price discrimination. Here, the provider doesn't know individual willingness to pay, but instead offers different price schedules based on consumption levels or product versions. Quantity discounts are a common example. Imagine a utility company offering lower per-unit rates to consumers who use larger amounts of electricity. Or consider different versions of software with varying features and price points designed to cater to different user needs and budgets. This strategy relies on self-selection. Consumers reveal their preferences through their choices, allowing the provider to capture a portion of the consumer surplus without needing to know each individual's maximum willingness to pay. It's a dance of inference, where the provider designs the options and consumers, through their decisions, reveal their own valuation. The policymaker will find second-degree price discrimination a more approachable tool, since it requires less information. The key is to make the products or bundles distinct enough that wealthier customers can't benefit from the cheaper versions, and the poor customers can afford to participate. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, the most prevalent form in the real world. This involves segmenting the market into distinct groups, perhaps based on age, location, or student status, and charging different prices to each group. Student discounts at cinemas, senior citizen fares on public transport, and geographically differentiated pricing for software are all examples of third-degree price discrimination. This approach requires the provider to identify and separate these market segments, preventing arbitrage, preventing consumers from one segment from purchasing the product at the lower price and reselling it to consumers in another segment. The classical economist will see the potential of this approach to increase overall output, since producers are better able to adapt to the different types of consumers available. The feasibility rests on the distinct elasticities of demand in each segment. If, for instance, the demand for textbooks is more elastic among students than among working professionals, a textbook publisher might offer student discounts without sacrificing profits from the professional market. In developing countries, the opportunities for price discrimination are significant. Access to essential goods and services like healthcare, education, and clean water can be expanded by offering lower prices to vulnerable populations. Third-degree price discrimination, for instance, can be implemented by offering subsidized rates to low-income communities, perhaps through targeted voucher programs. However, the challenges are equally profound. The risk of exploitation is ever present, and ensuring fairness and transparency is crucial. Robust regulatory frameworks are needed to prevent providers from abusing their market power and charging excessive prices to any segment. Moreover, the practicality of segmenting markets can be difficult, particularly in regions with limited infrastructure and pervasive informal economy. The cost of implementing and enforcing price discrimination strategies can also be substantial, potentially outweighing the benefits. Price discrimination, like any economic tool, is neither inherently good nor bad. It's a complex instrument, capable of both benefiting and harming society. Its effectiveness and ethical implications depend entirely on how it is implemented and regulated. As we move forward, consider the broader implications of market segmentation and the challenge of balancing efficiency with equity. What new strategies are rising to manage an increasingly segmented digital marketplace? Chapter 43, Case Study. Price discrimination in the pharmaceutical industry. Yes. We've traversed the landscape of imperfect competition, charting its valleys and peaks. Now, let us consider a specific and rather potent manifestation of that imperfection: price discrimination. Tonight, we will employ the tranquilizing lens of economic analysis to observe its workings within the pharmaceutical industry, a sector where the stakes of pricing strategies are often measured, not just in dollars, but in lives. Price discrimination, at its heart, is the practice of charging different prices to different consumers for the same good or service. It seems counterintuitive, perhaps even unfair at first glance. Yet, viewed through the economist's eye, it becomes a dance, a delicate balancing act attempting to maximize profit by extracting as much consumer surplus as possible. The industry chosen for study is especially pertinent because the consumer's need is both deeply personal and often urgent. We can categorize price discrimination into three distinct, yet interconnected, levels of sophistication. Imagine them as deepening pools, each requiring a more nuanced understanding of the consumer landscape. First-degree price discrimination, sometimes called perfect price discrimination, is the economist's theoretical ideal. Imagine the classical economist possessing perfect knowledge of each individual consumer's willingness to pay. In this idyllic, yet rarely achievable, scenario, the firm charges each customer precisely what they are willing to pay, capturing the entire consumer's surplus. Think of it as surgically removing every potential bit of value the consumer might have gained. In the pharmaceutical context, this might look like a hypothetical scenario where a drug company knows precisely how desperately each patient needs a life-saving medication and charges accordingly. This, of course, is rarely possible due to the asymmetry of information. Patients are unlikely to honestly reveal their maximum willingness to pay. Moving into the second pool, we find second-degree price discrimination. Here, the firm can't identify individual willingness to pay, but it can observe consumption patterns. The firm offers different prices based on the quantity consumed. Think of bulk discounts or tiered pricing plans. In pharmaceuticals, this manifests as tiered pricing based on formulary coverage or patient assistance programs. A large hospital chain negotiating a lower price for a high volume of a particular drug is an example. Patients on government assistance programs might receive medications at a significantly reduced cost compared to those purchasing out of pocket. The firm does not need to know an individual's maximum willingness to pay, simply their probable response to differing quantity thresholds. Finally, we arrive at the third pool, third-degree price discrimination. This involves dividing the market into distinct groups, each with different demand elasticities, and charging different prices to each group. This is arguably the most common form of price discrimination. A prime example in the pharmaceutical industry is differential pricing across countries. The policymaker in a developed nation with robust regulatory frameworks might pay a significantly higher price for a patented drug than their counterpart in a developing nation with weaker patent protection and greater price sensitivity. This is possible because the two markets are largely separated. Arbitrage, the practice of buying low in one market and selling high in another, is often restricted by regulations, transport costs, and intellectual property laws. Consider the complexities. A pharmaceutical company, aware of varying demand elasticities across demographics and geographies, might strategically price its drugs to maximize overall revenue. It's a delicate balancing act. High prices can generate significant profits in certain markets, but may also lead to accusations of price gouging and limit access to essential medicines for vulnerable populations. Lower prices may increase access, but reduce the incentives for future research and development. The ethical implications are considerable. Is it acceptable to charge different prices for the same life-saving medication based on a patient's ability to pay or their geographical location? The economic rationale is clear. It allows the company to recoup its research and development costs and continue to innovate. But the moral questions remain. As we prepare to shift our focus to the implications of market structure on research and development, ponder this. Is the delicate equilibrium achieved through price discrimination a sustainable model for the pharmaceutical industry? Or does it sow the seeds of future instability? Where does access to healthcare intersect with economic incentives? That, my friends, is a question that will linger in the air like a half-remembered melody until our next encounter. Chapter 44. Case Study. Price Discrimination in the Travel Industry. Good evening. We've been exploring the nuances of market structures and firm behavior, and as we continue this journey, it becomes illuminating to ground our theoretical understanding with real-world examples. Tonight, we'll turn our attention to the travel industry and examine how it employs the sophisticated art of price discrimination. Let's consider it a gentle case study, a quiet observation of market forces at play. Price discrimination, at its core, is the practice of selling the same good or service at different prices to different customers. This isn't simply about sales or discounts. It's about charging prices that reflect the value perceived by, or extracted from, various consumer segments. The bedrock upon which this rests is the ability to segregate these consumers. The travel industry, with its inherent complexities and diverse customer base, provides fertile ground for this practice. Think of the ways airlines, hotels, and even rental car companies attempt to capture maximum consumer surplus. Let's begin by considering first-degree price discrimination, sometimes referred to as perfect price discrimination. Imagine a benevolent, yet shrewd, monopolist airline representative. They possess the uncanny ability to know exactly how much each passenger is willing to pay for a flight. The classical economist might describe this as extracting every last drop of consumer surplus. They then charge each individual precisely that amount, converting what would have been consumer surplus into pure profit. In reality, this scenario is rarely perfectly achievable. The logistical hurdles of gauging each individual's willingness to pay are immense. However, personalized deals or targeted advertising, informed by sophisticated data analytics, represent approximations of this idealized form. Think of those individually tailored flight offers that appear in your inbox. Are they not, in some small way, trying to nudge you towards your maximum willingness to pay? Next, we move to second-degree price discrimination, often implemented through quantity discounts or product bundling. This is where the firm offers different pricing structures based on consumption patterns. A common example in the travel industry is tiered hotel packages. Consider a hotel offering a basic room rate, a rate with breakfast included, and a rate that includes breakfast, spa access, and a late checkout. Each tier caters to different levels of consumption and willingness to pay. The customer self-selects into the package that best suits their needs and budget. The policymaker might see this as a more efficient allocation of resources, as it allows consumers to access services aligned with their preferences, while simultaneously enabling the hotel to maximize its revenue across a broader range of customer profiles. It's a balancing act, a system of tailored choices. Finally, we arrive at third-degree price discrimination, the most commonly observed type. This involves dividing the market into distinct groups and charging different prices to each. Airlines, for instance, often segment customers based on booking time and flexibility. Business travelers, who often book flights closer to the departure date and require more flexibility, typically pay higher fares. Leisure travelers, who book in advance and are less flexible, benefit from lower fares. The logic is straightforward. Demand is more inelastic among business travelers, allowing the airline to charge a premium. Similarly, Airlines may charge different prices based on the point of origin. A flight from a smaller, less competitive airport might be more expensive than a flight from a major hub, even if the destination is the same. The airline is effectively exploiting geographic segmentation. Another subtle example exists in car rental pricing. Those renting from airport locations often face higher prices due to the convenience factor and time-sensitive nature of their needs. The availability of public transport and the urgency to arrive and depart drive this distinction. This third-degree approach, while appearing straightforward, rests on the assumption that the firm can effectively prevent arbitrage. That is, prevent someone from buying the cheaper product in one segment and reselling it to the higher price segment. As we close our exploration of price discrimination within the travel industry, consider the ethical and social implications. Is it simply a clever business strategy, or does it exploit consumer vulnerabilities? Does it benefit certain segments at the expense of others? The answers are complex, and they prompt us to consider the broader role of regulation and consumer protection in a world increasingly driven by data and personalized pricing. And as we transition to our next discussion on game theory, we might wonder, how do the strategies of these firms shift when they recognize that other players are also masters of price discrimination? The market, it seems, is a stage for constant interaction, a continuous adjustment toward an elusive equilibrium. Chapter 45. Conclusion. The enduring relevance of price discrimination in the modern economy. We've journeyed through the landscape of price discrimination, examining its various forms and implications. Now, as our time together draws to a close, let us reflect on the enduring relevance of these concepts in our modern economy. We recall, briefly, that while the classical economist may have viewed a uniform price as the ideal of efficiency, the realities of diverse consumer needs and market structures often necessitate more nuanced pricing strategies. Price discrimination, as we've observed, is not a monolithic practice, but rather a spectrum of approaches. First degree, or perfect, price discrimination remains a theoretical ideal, a shimmering mirage on the horizon of economic possibility. Imagine, if you will, a seller possessing the uncanny ability to extract the absolute maximum willingness to pay from each individual customer. This, of course, is rarely, if ever, achieved in practice. Its significance lies in its demonstration of the potential surplus available when information asymmetry is minimized. Second-degree price discrimination, on the other hand, is far more prevalent, woven into the fabric of our everyday transactions. Think of quantity discounts or tiered pricing plans offered by utilities. These strategies seek to segment consumers based on their consumption patterns, allowing sellers to capture a portion of the consumer surplus that would otherwise be lost. The logic is simple, yet profound. Offer different prices based on the quantity consumed, thereby catering to varying levels of demand and willingness to pay. Third-degree price discrimination, perhaps the most common and readily identifiable form, involves dividing the market into distinct groups and charging different prices to each. Student discounts, senior citizen fares, geographic pricing variations, these are all examples of this widespread practice. Here, the seller leverages observable characteristics to infer differences in demand elasticity across various consumer segments. The policymaker often grapples with the ethical implications of this approach, balancing concerns about fairness with the potential for increased overall welfare. Is it equitable to charge one group more than another? The answer, as is often the case in economics, is nuanced and depends on the specific context. The beauty and the complexity of price discrimination lies in its ability to reallocate resources and influence consumer behavior. Consider the airline industry, a veritable playground for price discrimination. Through sophisticated algorithms, airlines constantly adjust prices based on factors like booking time, day of travel, and seat availability. This allows them to fill seats that might otherwise go empty, increasing overall efficiency and arguably making air travel more accessible to a wider range of individuals. However, the practice is not without its potential drawbacks. Critics argue that it can lead to unfair outcomes, exploiting vulnerable consumers and exacerbating existing inequalities. The policymaker must therefore tread carefully, striving to create a regulatory environment that fosters innovation and efficiency while safeguarding consumer interests. The advent of digital technologies has further complicated the landscape. With the rise of personalized pricing and data-driven marketing, the potential for both beneficial and detrimental applications of price discrimination has increased exponentially. Algorithms can now analyze vast amounts of data to predict individual consumers' willingness to pay, enabling sellers to tailor prices with unprecedented precision. This raises profound questions about transparency, privacy, and the potential for algorithmic bias. The study of price discrimination offers us a valuable lens through which to understand the dynamics of markets, the motivations of firms, and the complexities of consumer behavior. It challenges us to think critically about the relationship between price, value, and fairness. It is a field of ongoing evolution, constantly adapting to the changing technological and economic landscape. As we conclude our exploration, it is clear that the mechanisms of price discrimination, first, second, and third degree, remain remarkably relevant in the modern economy. They shape our interactions with businesses, influence our purchasing decisions, and raise fundamental questions about the nature of economic justice. But, as technology continues to advance and new business models emerge, one can't help but wonder, what new forms of price adaptation will arise in the coming economic era? Perhaps the next chapter awaits.